Lord Shui Jian? Do you have something on your mind? Ruler Hao Jin noticed that there was something wrong with Jian Wushuang. He raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion. Jian Wushuang did not reply, but Hao Jin seemed to have guessed something. He laughed and said, Lord Shui Jian, you're able to defeat Bing Yi, who is a half-invincible supreme, even though you're only a primary supreme. That itself shows how powerful you are. You don't need to take the words of Great Void Divine Emperor to heart. Jian Wushuang smiled but did not reply. He just raised his head and looked at the boundless starry sky with his hands behind his back, his eyes revealing a thoughtful look. The off-world battlefield. He had caught the words off-world battlefield from Great Void Divine Emperor's mouth. He was no stranger to these words. When he had just broken through to the Supreme Realm, Supreme Bloodwave had vaguely mentioned it to him. The off-world battlefield was a battlefield located at the edge of the cosmos. It was personally suppressed by Lord Cosmos God. Hence, Cosmos God's universe Tao importation was exceptionally rare. That was because the Cosmos Gods were stationed in the off-world battlefield all year round and would rarely return to the depths of the universe. Moreover, according to Bloodwave, the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had gone to the off-world battlefield and had never returned. In addition, most of the invincible supremes in the universe were gathered at the off-world battlefield. Off-world. Jian Wushuang kept thinking about what the off-world referred to. A moment later, Jian Wushuang bid his farewell to ruler Hao Jin and the others before leaving the Great Void Temple. However, he didn't choose to go to Cosmos Temple or the Dragon Tribe. Instead, he set up Universe Boat and headed toward the Divine Life Palace. 3 days later, the news that Jian Wushuang had killed Supreme Bing Yi in the Great Void Temple spread throughout the universe. In an instant, the universe trembled and boiled again. The great beings of all races in the universe were in an uproar. Then, they could not sit still anymore. They all went to the Divine Life Palace, wanting to form a war alliance with it. Then, the details of the battle between Jian Wushuang and Supreme Bing Yi were spread to the entire universe through the Xuanguang Mirror. Countless people watched this battle with great interest, exclaiming and clapping in admiration. Jian Wushuang's talent and swordsmanship are both exceptionally rare. Jian Wushuang will become the second Supreme Tarot. No. When Supreme Tarot was at Jian Wushuang's realm, he was far from being as powerful as Jian Wushuang. How do you think Jian Wushuang released his last move? Could it be that Supreme Tarot really didn't die? Or is Jian Wushuang the reincarnation of Tarot? All of a sudden, all kinds of bizarre discussions were going on. The universe was filled with discussions about Jian Wushuang. Unknowingly, Jian Wushuang had already become a legendary figure that others looked up to. Solar Star Field, the territory of the Golden Crow clan. 9 fireballs formed a line and revolved around a huge sun. This was the old nest of the Golden Crow clan. The huge sun in the middle was the chamber of the Golden Crow Emperor. Jian Wushuang. He was actually able to kill a half-invincible supreme. Golden Crow Prince stood in the sun and looked into the distant starry sky with a dazed expression. Once upon a time, the two of them had fought on the ancient path of stars. He had been working hard to improve himself so that he could fight Jian Wushuang again one day. While Jian Wushuang was attending the great clan gathering, he was in seclusion. When Jian Wushuang had dominated the 4 great forces, he had been in seclusion. Now, he had finally come out of seclusion. In the clan, he had become the second person to reach the supreme realm other than Golden Crow Emperor. He had thought that he, who had broken through to the supreme level, would have the power to fight Jian Wushuang. In the end, just as he made the vow and was ready to go out to find Jian Wushuang, he heard the news that Jian Wushuang had killed Supreme Bing Yi. What kind of person was Bing Yi? He was a famous half-invincible supreme in the universe, the leader of a powerful force. In terms of strength and reputation, he was no weaker than his father, the Golden Crow Emperor. In fact, Bing Yi was even stronger than his father. In the end, such a mighty being was almost killed by Jian Wushuang. If Great Void Divine Emperor had not arrived in time, Bing Yi would have been killed. This guy, Jian Wushuang, Golden Crow Prince muttered to himself. He felt that the more he understood Jian Wushuang, the more he felt that the gap between the two was too great. It was so great that he could not even look up to him. Thud, thud. At this moment, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Golden Crow Emperor, who was walking out from the depths of the palace. Golden Crow Emperor glanced at Golden Crow Prince and said, "Linner, quickly pack up and follow father to the Divine Life Palace." "Ha!" Hearing this, Golden Crow Prince was stunned and asked, "Father, what are we going to the Divine Life Palace for?" Golden Crow Emperor glared at him and replied, "Aren't you going to clean up your mess in the past? Back then on the ancient path of stars, you had a conflict with Jian Wushuang, and it was the divine thoughts that I placed in you that saved you. Although it had happened a long time ago and there was not much hatred between you two, no one knows if Jian Wushuang is a person who would take revenge for the smallest grievance. Now, Jian Wushuang could match with a half-invincible supreme with his sword. In terms of strength, even I am not his match. I can't win him with martial arts alone, so I naturally have to apologize to him. If he holds a grudge, then we can forget about the grudge, but if he doesn't, then we can also be considered to have formed a good relationship." Hearing this, Prince Golden Crow was shocked. Was Jian Wushuang so powerful that his father had to travel so far just to please him? Alright, don't think too much. Everyone has their own destiny. Jian Wushuang is a rare monster. Why are you comparing yourself to him? Golden Crow Emperor patted his son's shoulder and said with a smile, "Let's go. Come with me to the Divine Life Palace." "Yes." Golden Crow Prince nodded slightly. Similar scenes were happening across the universe. Within the universe, Jian Wushuang drove the cosmic boat, braving the wind and breaking the waves. He was traveling at a high speed. He did not rush back to the Divine Life Palace. Instead, he went to the glacial Forbidden Land in the far north of the universe to pick up Lung Rushuang. Then, he returned to the Divine Life Palace. To him, suppressing Supreme Bing Yi with his sword was already his limit. Cosmos Temple and the Dragon Clan were both behemoths that were personally guarded by invincible supremes. Although the strength of Supreme He Yu of the Cosmos Temple could only be considered at the bottom among the invincible supremes, he was still a true invincible supreme. He was definitely not someone Jian Wushuang could match. As for the Dragon Clan, there was no need to talk about it. The third generation of the Dragon bloodline was already at the invincible supreme cultivation realm. It was rumored that there was even a second-generation dragon in deep sleep. If third-generation dragon was already an invincible supreme, what would the second-generation dragon be like? Jian Wushuang was terrified. All that, coupled with Great Void Divine Emperor's words, pushed Jian Wushuang to make a decision in his heart. Instead of taking the risk and putting himself in danger, he might as well increase his power first. When it was time to truly destroy them, he would crush them as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, leaving no room for mercy. It had been 3 months since Jian Wushuang returned to the Divine Life Palace. People came to visit him in an endless stream. These people were either the masters of holy lands or the emperors of divine kingdoms. They were all almighty beings who could shake the entire universe with a single stomp of their feet. In the beginning, Jian Wushuang was quite patient and chatted with them over wine. However, as time passed, he found that he had no time to cultivate, so he simply closed the door and refused to see the guests, leaving the other supremes of the Divine Life Palace to talk to them. The Divine Life Palace, the 6th mountain range, Jian Wushuang's manor. Supreme Bloodwave and the Supreme Junfu had come as guests. The 3 of them sat by the lake next to the manor. Lung Rushuang made them a cup of spirit tea and left obediently, not interrupting their conversation. "Master Bloodwave, I've been meaning to ask you 3 questions. I'd like you to answer them for me," Jian Wushuang said. "What?" Supreme Bloodwave raised his eyebrows and teased, "Jian Wushuang, you've been a popular person in the universe recently. I didn't think that you'd still have things to ask me. Alright, if you have any questions, just ask them directly. There's no need for such formalities between us." Supreme Bloodwave Supreme with a smile. Jian Wushuang nodded. After pondering for a while, he slowly asked, "Master Bloodwave, what is the so-called Great Catastrophe War that the people in the universe often talk about? What is the off-world battlefield?" In addition, Supreme Taro was at his peak back then, and there were few in the universe who could be his match, but who was the one that killed him? How did he just die in an instant like that? Even his divine kingdom was destroyed. When Supreme Blood Wave Supreme, he looked at the Supreme Junfu and did not rush to reply. Instead, his expression gradually turned solemn. After a long while, the Blood Wave spoke, Jian Wushuang, even if you didn't ask, I was going to tell you. Since you asked, I'll answer your questions. First of all, when we talk about the Great Catastrophe War, I'll have to tell you about this universe. Jian Wushuang, do you think that the universe is unique? Jian Wushuang was shocked when he heard this. He took a deep breath and replied, I don't know, but it's the only universe I've ever seen. Supreme Blood Wave Supreme in response and took a sip of the spirit tea before saying, Before the Great Catastrophe War, all of us were the same as you. We thought that the universe was unique until the Great Catastrophe War happened. 100,000 chaos cycles ago, a palm-sized spatial rift suddenly appeared at the edge of the universe. In the beginning, no one thought much of the crack in the void. After a long time, a man with 3 heads and 6 arms crawled out of the crack. This person calls himself Zhen Kuei, and he came from another universe. He's terrifyingly powerful. He's only a high supreme realm martial artist, but he can kill a top supreme without the opponent having a chance to retaliate. In fact, even a half-invincible supreme would not be a match for him. It would be a great celebration if they could survive his attack. After this Zhen Kuei arrived in the universe, he immediately started a massacre and brought about a bloody storm. Countless races were exterminated by him, and countless powerful beings died at his hands. For a moment, the entire universe was filled with wails and turned into a land of smoke. There are no words that can be used to describe the tragedy of the universe at that time. After a pause, Supreme Blood Wave looked at Jian Wushuang and sighed. It's a pity that 100,000 chaos cycles ago, the number 1 genius of that era, Jiedong, died to Zhen Kuei. If Jiedong hadn't fallen, he would probably be one of the most powerful figures in the universe by now. Blood Wave sighed with emotion. Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank. The number 1 genius from 100,000 chaos cycles ago, Jiedong. He was the previous owner of the Chaos Wushu Cauldron, and he had died like this? Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang could not help but feel a sense of pity. Supreme Blood Wave continued. It was only then that we finally understood that there was another parallel universe other than our universe. And this universe, we call it Void. Void. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and there was a flash of light. Supreme Junfu nodded and said in a deep voice, That's right, because their cultivation method is completely different from ours. They rely on cultivating a breath of void qi. That's why we call them the Void Universe. In terms of overall strength, the cultivators in the Void Universe are much stronger than us, if both are in the same cultivation realm. As such, they're particularly troublesome and difficult to deal with. Is that so? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and he was in deep thought. Jian Wushuang. The Great Catastrophe War was started by this man named Zhen Kuei. When he was slaughtering everyone in the universe, he was finally noticed by the top experts in the universe. 3 invincible supreme masters took action and suppressed him. Even so, this person still managed to use a secret technique and escape with serious injuries. He returned to the Void Universe. The universe fell into a state of peace. 7 chaos cycles after he fled, the rift in the void which had been mended by a mighty expert was once more torn open. Tens of thousands of people from the Void Universe crawled out of the crack. Our entire universe was suddenly plunged into the endless flames of war. Countless races in the universe were in deep waters and scorching flames. This battle will be known as the Great Catastrophe War. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang finally understood. He could imagine how fierce the Great Catastrophe War was. It was an event that swept across the entire universe. What happened after that? How did this battle end? Jian Wushuang continued to ask. Supreme Blood Wave chuckled upon hearing this. He raised his head and looked up at the sky with a hint of reverence in his eyes as he said, After that, the Lord Cosmos God rose to power among the myriad of races. He helped the building collapse and saved it from the brink of collapse. The victory and defeat of this battle were decided in one fell swoop. Under the leadership of Lord Cosmos God, this battle was finally reversed. We turned defeat into victory and killed all the cultivators of the void universe. It was also because of this battle that Lord Cosmos God's title as the #1 person in the cosmos was established. We respectfully refer to him as Cosmos God. Jian Wushuang could not calm down for a long time. That era must have been an epic era with many geniuses, bright stars, and magnificent waves. Blood Wave smiled. He picked up the spirit tea and blew on the steam rising from it. Jian Wushuang, the off-world battle you asked about is a product of this battle. Although we managed to kill the cultivators of the void universe under the leadership of Lord Cosmos God, the crack in the void has yet to close. Even now, there are still experts of the void universe trying to enter through the crack from time to time. However, Lord Cosmos God is personally in charge of that place, and there are also several invincible supremes patrolling the area all year round. Generally, people from the void universe are not able to enter our cosmos, thanks to Lord Cosmos God and the others. Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment before cupping his hands at Supreme Blood Wave. Thank you for clearing my doubts, Master Blood Wave. I understand. There's no need to be so polite. Supreme Blood Wave nodded his head and put down the teacup in his hand. Next, I'll tell you how Supreme Tarot died. The Divine Life Palace. The 6th Mountain Range. Jian Wushuang's manor. There was a faint mist on the cloud lake. Wisps of white mist rose from the surface of the lake and then dispersed. The water and the sky were the same color, giving off a profound feeling. It was as if one could comprehend the universe's grand meaning just by staring at it. Jian Wushuang, Supreme Blood Wave, and the others were sitting on the bow of a black boat. The boat swayed on the surface of the lake without any wind, leaving 2 long and calm ripples, as if leaving scars on the surface of the lake. Jian Wushuang, Supreme Blood Wave, and Supreme Jun Fu brewed tea and burned incense. It was a rather elegant scene. Jian Wushuang, Supreme Tarot was extremely powerful back then, and his name was well known. It is not a big secret that he died in the universe, but it is rarely spread in the universe. Firstly, it is because they are afraid of distorting the truth. Secondly, they are afraid of causing panic and putting people themselves in danger. Supreme Blood Wave lifted his wide sleeves and picked up a ceramic teapot. He then poured a cup of tea for Jian Wushuang and Supreme Jun Fu. The water was green in color, and waves of spiritual qi mixed with the light fragrance of tea spread out. This cup of tea was very valuable. If an ordinary mortal drank from this cup, he would immediately shed his mortal body and become an immortal. Even supreme martial artists like them would feel comfortable and their divine power would be nourished after drinking it. People are in a state of panic? Jian Wushuang picked up the teacup and took a sip. He then frowned and asked, Supreme Blood Wave, what is the meaning of this? Supreme Tarot wasn't killed by someone from our universe, Blood Wave replied. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and there was a flash of fierceness in them. Supreme Blood Wave, you're saying that Supreme Tarot died at the hands of someone from the void universe? Supreme Blood Wave nodded his head, and his expression gradually turned serious. That's right. 300 chaos cycles ago, a group of experts called themselves Devourers. For some reason, they broke through the off-world battlefields and descended upon our universe. The leader of this group was known as the Devouring Emperor. At that time, Supreme Tarot, who was on duty to suppress the off-world battlefield, happened to bump into them in the universe. As a result, the battle had entered a stalemate the moment it started. No one knew the exact details of that battle. They only knew that the Supreme Tarot, who had been at the peak of the universe and had been undefeated through tens of thousands of battles, had suddenly died. After that, Devourers came to the Tarot Divine Kingdom and killed billions of people. The Supreme Tarot could only send the Tarot Divine Sword into the depths of the universe before he died, forming the Tarot Ruins. After that, Lord Cosmos God arrived and exterminated the Devourers group. However, what's worth mentioning about that battle is that the devouring emperor actually exchanged 3 blows with Lord Cosmos God and was not defeated. In the end, he even brought the devourer's group and retreated safely. Is that so? Jian Wushuang frowned and his eyes flickered. Others might not know how powerful Supreme Tarot was, but Jian Wushuang had fought with him in the trial space for 10,000 years, so he was very clear about it. Supreme Tarot was an unparalleled mighty person whose sword Dao illuminated the night. There were very few people in the entire universe who could defeat him, let alone kill him. There was no chance of escape. Jian Wushuang, it seems that the Devourer's organization was the one who caused the disaster in 9 Luminaries' Great Star Field. Bloodwave continued. It's them. Jian Wushuang was shocked and his eyes lit up. He naturally remembered the world-ending catastrophe in 9 Luminaries' Great Star Field. If it were not for Heartslayer and the others, he would have died in there. However, from what those mysterious black-robed men had said, they were there for his master, Xianxia. Jian Wushuang's thoughts flashed like lightning and he instantly grasped a few key points. Devouring Emperor, Void Universe, Off-World Battlefield, Cosmos God, and his own master, Xianxia. These seemingly unrelated people were connected by an invisible thread. Back then, during the Universe Great Clan gathering, Cosmos God had told him that his master, Xianxia, was an old friend of his. Then, what was the purpose of this situation? What role did his master, Xianxia, play in the overall situation? And himself, Jian Wushuang, what was his identity? Jian Wushuang fell into silence, his eyes flashing with thoughts. He started to recall everything that had happened between him and Xianxia from the beginning until now. After a long time, Jian Wushuang heaved a long sigh and his eyes were filled with confusion. He looked up at the boundless starry sky and shook his head. Master, what do you want to do? Supreme Bloodwave and Supreme Jun Fu noticed this and exchanged a glance. Jian Wushuang, what's wrong? It's nothing. Jian Wushuang turned around and smiled at them. A moment later, Bloodwave and Jun Fu left. Jian Wushuang sat at the bow of the boat alone, frowning and deep in thought. My husband. Lung Rushuang appeared behind Jian Wushuang. She stretched out her slender hand and gently smoothed out the frown between Jian Wushuang's eyebrows. What's wrong? Is there something bothering you? You can talk to me. Perhaps I will have an idea. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, shook his head, and said with a smile, Shuanger, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. After saying that, Jian Wushuang stretched out his finger and gently scratched the bridge of Lung Rushuang's nose. He then stood up and headed into the manor. He had a premonition that the universe would be in chaos again soon. Before that, the only thing he could do was to increase his strength. As long as he was strong enough, he would be able to deal with the Void Universe, Devourers, or his master Xianxi's plans. Only strength was the foundation to stand tall in this world. Bang! Jian Wushuang stepped into the cultivation room and started a long seclusion. For him, it was not difficult to break through to the intermediate supreme realm. He just needed to go with the flow and continuously condense his divine power. After he broke through to the intermediate supreme realm, his strength would make another qualitative leap. In the blink of an eye, 3,000 years had passed. In the past 3,000 years, Jian Wushuang had been constantly condensing his strength and stabilizing his cultivation. Finally, he had pushed to the peak of the primary supreme realm. For a perfect chaotic lifeform like Jian Wushuang, breaking through the barrier of a major cultivation realm would be tens of millions of times more difficult than for ordinary people. However, breaking through such a small cultivation realm was much easier. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to take the step to break through to the intermediate supreme realm, a cosmic god decree suddenly arrived at the Divine Life Palace. Jian Wushuang, the Cosmos God has ordered you to come to the Supreme Temple. Supreme Bloodwave's voice rang in Jian Wushuang's mind. What? Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Why would Lord Cosmos God's decree be sent to the Divine Life Palace at this time? Jian Wushuang frowned, but he could tell from the tone of Supreme Bloodwave that the situation was urgent. Jian Wushuang did not waste any time. He disappeared from the manor in a flash. When they arrived at the Supreme Temple, it was a solemn scene. Supreme Blood Wave and Supreme Jun Fu were standing respectfully, cupping their hands as they listened. At the head of the hall, a young man with red lips and white teeth was standing tall with a decree in his hand. This person was one of the disciples of the cosmos god, Lan Su. Jian Wushuang greets Master Lan Su. Jian Wushuang glanced at Supreme Blood Wave and the others, then cupped his hands and bowed slightly. There's no need to be so polite, Supreme Wushuang. Lan Su gave Jian Wushuang a friendly smile. He was quite polite to Jian Wushuang, who had almost become his junior brother at the great clan gathering. Jian Wushuang nodded and then asked, Lord Lan Su, you have traveled thousands of miles to the Divine Life Palace. May I know what is the matter? Yes, Lan Su replied. I've indeed come to the Divine Life Palace to discuss something important. At this point, Lan Su paused, and a serious expression appeared on his face. He looked around at the people in the hall and said solemnly, Everyone, the off-world battlefield is in chaos. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was shocked. What? The off-world battlefield is in chaos? Isn't the off-world battlefield personally suppressed by Lord Cosmos God? Why is it chaotic? The void has already been at peace with us for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. Why is it suddenly like this? How's the situation there? Are the people from the void universe about to attack? Don't tell me we're going to start another great catastrophe war? Everyone's faces paled, and even Supreme Blood Wave and the others' expressions changed slightly. Looking at this scene, Lan Su's expression softened a little. He shook his head and said, There's no need to be so nervous. The situation isn't that serious. My master is personally watching over the off-world battlefield. There won't be trouble in a short time. Hearing this, everyone let out a long sigh of relief. Lord Lan Su, why have you come to the Divine Life Palace? Jian Wushuang asked with a frown. Lan Su glanced at Jian Wushuang and replied with a smile. It's like this. This time, a large number of void warriors from the void universe have swarmed out of the battlefield. Lord Cosmos God can't do everything himself. Just relying on the Supremes who were originally on the battlefield is no longer enough to suppress this rebellion. It's too strenuous. Hence, Lord Cosmos God ordered me to find manpower from the universe. Every faction with a Supreme in their sect must send at least one Supreme to the off-world battlefield to suppress the chaos. As for the Divine Life Palace, there are only 2 spots for the battle. In other words, your palace must send 2 Supremes to the off-world battlefield. Everyone in the Divine Life Palace looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Lan Su was not in a hurry to get an answer. He said in a deep voice, Everyone, this matter concerns the safety of the universe. I hope that everyone can put aside their own lives and assist Cosmos God to end this rebellion. Alright, I have to make a trip to the Dragon Clan now. I also have to inform the other major forces, so I'll make a move first. 10 years later, I will wait for you at the port of the Mystic Sun Star Field. We will go through the Universe Passage and head to the off-world battlefield together. Lan Su did not stay any longer and strode away. It could be seen that although the situation was not that serious, it was still urgent. After Lan Su left, everyone in the Supreme Temple frowned and did not speak. Putting aside the fact that Lord Cosmos God had personally given the order, even if Lord Cosmos God had not given the order, they would definitely have to go to the off-world battlefield. Just as Lan Su had said, this matter concerned the safety of the entire universe. Once the chaos in the off-world battlefield gets out of hand, a large number of void warriors from the void universe would flood into the universe. When the nest was overturned, would the eggs remain intact? However, it was difficult to send the 2 supreme martial artists to the off-world battlefield. The Divine Life Palace was currently in a state of turmoil and was lacking a pillar of support. If anything were to happen to the person they had sent, the Divine Life Palace might collapse completely like a broken dam. A moment later, Supreme Blood Wave muttered, The off-world battlefield is extremely dangerous and full of killing intent. If an ordinary supreme martial artist were to go, they would most likely die. The danger is too great. He paused. Blood Wave seemed to have made a decision. How about this? Supreme Tianyi and I will be the ones to head to the off-world battlefield, while Supreme Junfu will be in charge of guarding the Divine Life Palace. As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Tianyi nodded his head. The two of them were at the top Supreme Realm. Even if they were to encounter a half-invincible Supreme enemy, they would still have the power to fight. Furthermore, the two of them had fought side by side for many years. When the time came, they would be able to support each other and take care of each other on the battlefield. Supreme Junfu did not have any objections to this. He had yet to fully recover from his injuries, so he could stay in the Divine Life Palace and recover from them. Just as the decision was about to take effect and Supreme Bloodwave and Supreme Tianyi were about to pack up and head to the port of the Mystic Sun Star Field, Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King took a step forward in tacit understanding and spoke in unison. I, Jian Wushuang, will go to the off-world battlefield to fight for the Divine Life Palace. I, Ninth Culpa King, will go to the off-world battlefield to fight for the Divine Life Palace. As soon as they finished speaking, everyone was stunned. The two of you seem to have a tacit understanding, Supreme Bloodwave chuckled. Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King could not help but look at each other with surprise in their eyes. Jian Wushuang shook his head and said, Supreme Bloodwave, even if Lord Lan Su didn't come today, I was prepared to take a trip to the off-world battlefield. Oh! Supreme Bloodwave narrowed his eyes. When Jian Wushuang had asked him about the off-world battlefield and Supreme Taro's death, he had already guessed that Jian Wushuang might have some connection with the people in the Void Universe. However, Jian Wushuang was extremely talented and was the hope of the Divine Life Palace's rise in the future. If anything happened to him on the off-world battlefield, Jian Wushuang, the off-world battlefield is too dangerous. What you need to do now is to grow slowly. Just as Supreme Bloodwave was about to refuse, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said in a deep voice, If we're talking about danger, Supreme Bloodwave, then I'm afraid that with my current level of power, it'll be a bit less dangerous. Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with confidence. Supreme Bloodwave was stunned for a moment before he fell silent. He had almost forgotten that Jian Wushuang could kill a half-invincible Supreme with his sword. Compared to himself, Jian Wushuang was much stronger. Supreme Bloodwave was not an indecisive person. His eyes flickered as he thought of this. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Fine, Jian Wushuang. You'll go to the off-world battlefield on behalf of the Divine Life Palace and suppress the chaos. I, Jian Wushuang, will carry out your orders. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's eyes sparkled and he cupped his hands. On this trip to the off-world battlefield, he was determined to win. Firstly, it was to suppress the chaos, and secondly, it was for himself. He already had a guess about his master Xianyi. With Xianyi's strength, if he was still in this universe, there would definitely be some news about him. It was highly possible that Xianyi was on the off-world battlefield. Furthermore, it was time for him to find out more about the Devouring Emperor. Finally, his power had reached a bottleneck. Even if he stayed in the universe to cultivate in seclusion, it would be of little use. Whether it was the Cosmos Temple or the Dragon Clan, they were both immortal forces with invincible supremes. With his current power, he could not pose any threat to these two top forces. Rather than that, he might as well go to the off-world battlefield and increase his strength through battle. Besides that, there was another point. It was Supreme Bing Yi. Jian Wushuang remembered that before Great Void Divine Emperor left, he had said that he would bring Supreme Bing Yi to the off-world battlefield. Jian Wushuang had once sworn to the heavens that he would kill Supreme Bing Yi and the others. Otherwise, he would fall into the abyss and cease to be human. He, Jian Wushuang, was never a man of empty words. Supreme Bloodwave, what about me? Ninth Culpa King said from the side. He frowned when he saw that the Bloodwave Supreme had arranged for Jian Wushuang to be there but did not mention him. Supreme Bloodwave glanced at Ninth Culpa King and could not help but smile bitterly. Ninth Culpa King was also a stubborn person, and he was afraid that he would not be able to stop him if he did not let him go. Okay, you can go with Jian Wushuang. Suddenly, a hint of joy flashed in Ninth Culpa King's eyes. He cupped his hands and shouted, I, Ninth Culpa King, will carry out your orders. All right, since this matter is settled, you may all withdraw. Supreme blood wave rubbed the space between his brows as a hint of exhaustion appeared on his face. Supreme Master Gaifu was currently in a deep sleep, and he was in charge of managing the Divine Life Palace. This was truly exhausting. Yes, everyone left. When they arrived at the entrance of the Supreme Temple, Ninth Culpa King glanced at Jian Wushuang and said with a faint smile, "Jian Wushuang, I'm not as strong as you now, but we can compete to see who can kill more Void Warriors in the off-world battlefield." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but show an interested look in his eyes. He nodded and said, "All right. Yes, Jian Wushuang. The Mystic Sun star field is not close to here. You and I should go back and make preparations. We will set off together in a year." The two of them exchanged a few more words before they went their separate ways. When Jian Wushuang returned to his manor in the 6th mountain range, he told Lung Rushuang about the expedition. Lung Rushuang's heart tightened. Fortunately, Lung Rushuang was not a pretentious person. No matter how reluctant she was, she could only remind Jian Wushuang to be careful. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but sigh. Over the years, the two of them had been away more than together, and there were almost no opportunities for them to be intimate. "Fine, I'll spend this last year with Shuanger." Jian Wushuang made up his mind. A year later, outside the Divine Life Palace, Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King bade farewell to Supreme Blood Wave Supreme and the others who had come to see them off. Then, they steered the cosmic boat and flew toward the Mystic Sun port. They were on their way to the Mystic Sun star field. On the deck of the cosmic boat, Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King stood side by side. One of them was wearing a wide black robe and a hood that covered half of his face. The other one was wearing a white robe, with cold eyes and white hair hanging down. The two of them, one in black and the other in white, were the two most heaven-defying geniuses in the universe. Jian Wushuang, almost none of the Void Warriors who crawled out of the off-world battlefield have cultivation realms below the supreme level. Moreover, they can release a strange light wave. They are not easy to deal with, Ninth Culpa King said indifferently with his hands behind his back. Although he was arrogant, he was not impetuous. He had collected a lot of information about the Void Universe in the past year. The more he understood, the more serious and furious he became. The cultivators of the Void Universe were cruel and bloodthirsty by nature, and they treated the people of their universe with extreme cruelty. In every chaos cycle, countless experts across their universe had been tortured to death. A strange light wave? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and his eyes were filled with curiosity. "That's right." The Ninth Culpa King nodded and replied, "The cultivators of the Void Universe all have an accompanying magical power. It's that strange light wave. We call it Void Explosion. It's because of the existence of this Void Explosion that an ordinary Void Warrior of the Void Universe is usually stronger than the cultivators of the same cultivation realm in our universe." Jian Wushuang nodded his head after some thought. However, he did not really care. He thought that no cultivator in the Void Universe would be stronger than him in the same cultivation realm. He was very confident. Other than that, the experts of the Void Universe have all kinds of appearances. There are 3-headed and 6-armed ones, and there are also headless ones with axes. In short, they look more like evil beings. But the good news is that they're easy to identify. All the members of the Void Universe have a long scar on their shoulders. I'm not sure about those below the Supreme Realm level, but it holds true for all those above the Supreme level. A primary Supreme level Void Warrior has a long scar on their shoulder, the Intermediate Supremes have 2 long scars on their shoulders, and so on. A Void Warrior with the power of an invincible Supreme has 5 long scars on their shoulder. Ninth Culpa King explained slowly. "I understand." Jian Wushuang nodded. Whoosh. The two of them were discussing while flying toward the Mystic Sun star field. Their speed was not slow, just like meteors crossing the sky. The stars moved, and the galaxies revolved. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. Jian Wushuang, the Mystic Sun star field is up ahead. Ninth Culpa King narrowed his eyes and looked forward as he spoke. As far as the eye could see, a vast star field formed by countless nebulas, planets, and stars appeared in front of them. "Yes, let's go." They should be here by now. Jian Wushuang nodded. Then the two of them got off the cosmic boat, put it away, and walked toward the ferry of the Mystic Sun star field. The Mystic Sun port was also the gathering point of many universe passages. It was connected to all the major star fields and top forces in the universe. The two of them had just arrived at the Mystic Sun port when they saw Lan Su and the rest already sitting cross-legged and waiting. Supreme Wushuang? Supreme Ninth Culpa? The Divine Life Palace has actually sent two of you this time. Sensing the approaching auras of Jian Wushuang and the other person, Lan Su slowly opened his eyes and looked over. A slight surprise flashed in his eyes. Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King were the most precious trump cards of the Divine Life Palace. He had thought that the Divine Life Palace would not send the two of them this time. Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King greet Lord Lan Su. Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King cupped their hands. Then, they looked at the few figures standing beside Lan Su and sneered. They did not expect to meet so many acquaintances here. At this moment, the young man with two horns on his head, dressed in a golden robe, and an arrogant look standing beside Lan Su was none other than Long Qing. Jian Wushuang. At the same time, Long Qing also noticed Jian Wushuang. Suddenly, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Beside him, there were two other Dragon Clan experts. They were both fourth-generation dragons. However, the strength of these two people was much weaker than Long Qing's. He is Jian Wushuang? It's him? A mere primary supreme martial artist can cause our Dragon Clan to go to war? The guy that ran back with his tail tucked between his legs after provoking our clan. The two Dragons Clan disciples exchanged glances as bewilderment flashed in their eyes. Long time no see. I've missed you so much. Jian Wushuang squinted at Long Qing and sneered. Compared to Supreme Bing Yi, his hatred for Long Qing was far greater. Back then, he had been chased by Long Qing and was almost killed. One stomp after another, his divine body was destroyed. Of course, if it were not for this person, he would not have gotten to know Overlord Patriarch and obtain the Chaos Overlord body. Good, very good. Jian Wushuang, I thought that I would have to wait at least 10 million years to kill you. I didn't expect you to join this expedition. Long Qing looked at Jian Wushuang with a cold glint in his eyes and a cruel smile on his face. Jian Wushuang, let's have some fun on the off-world battlefield. After that, Long Qing turned his eyes and looked at Ninth Culpa King, who was next to Jian Wushuang again. He said in a cold voice, "And you, Ninth Culpa King, you were the one who belittled me at the end of the great clan gathering, right? I've always kept score in my mind. When we get to the off-world battlefield, I'll play with you too." Ninth Culpa King's expression was cold. He did not even lift his eyelids when he heard this and calmly replied, "You think you're worthy? You?" Long Qing was instantly enraged, and the veins on his forehead were throbbing. Jian Wushuang could not help but find it funny. Ninth Culpa King seemed indifferent and reticent, but once he spoke, he could hit the target's sore spot. Lan Su, who was watching from the side, could not help but frown and said, "Everyone, you are the elites of our universe. You are the main force of our suppression. How can we start an internal conflict before the enemy is destroyed?" After a pause, Lan Su said in a deep voice, "Everyone, now that we are facing a great enemy, I hope that all of you can put aside your past grudges and focus on annihilating the outsiders first. Otherwise, if I were to discover that all of you have affected the war situation because of your personal conflicts, don't blame me for reporting this and informing Lord Cosmos God." As soon as he said that, everyone fell silent, but their faces were still ugly. Lan Su only had the cultivation level of a high supreme realm. If not for the backing of the Lord Cosmos God, he would have been slapped to death long ago. Seeing this, Lan Su could only smile bitterly in his heart. He shook his head helplessly and said, "All right, let's wait a little longer. It's almost time for us to set off. You're the first batch to head to the off-world battlefield. I'll have to come back to transfer the second batch." The crowd nodded and no longer spoke. After that, more and more people came from all over the universe. Jian Wushuang met many familiar faces, such as the 9-star Saint of the 9-star Holy Land and the Maluo clan's Maluo Yengu. There was also a group of high supreme realm cultivators from the Cosmos Temple. In the two great battles, the Divine Life Palace suffered heavy losses, and the Cosmos Temple was not any better. Almost all of the Supremes had died. It was already rare for them to send out a High Supreme. The High Supreme from the Cosmos Temple had been arrogant, but when he saw Jian Wushuang, he immediately lowered his head like a mouse seeing a cat. He was afraid that Jian Wushuang would cause him trouble. Jian Wushuang had suppressed the two half-invincible Supremes and had become famous. 3 months later, Lan Su looked at the people who had arrived, nodded and said, "All right, the first batch of candidates has all arrived. We can set off now." At this moment, there were 11 supreme martial artists standing on the Mystic Sun port. The 11 Supremes were all extremely powerful. Besides Jian Wushuang, who was a primary supreme, 9th Kulpa King, who was an intermediate supreme, the rest of them were at least at the high supreme realm. The next moment, Lan Su flipped his right hand and 4 small white flags appeared. "Go!" he shouted in a low voice, and 4 small white flags shot into the sky, forming a barrier. Ding! In the void, a bright light suddenly shone. Rays of light outlined each other and formed an array. Rumble! Immediately after, the boundless void was torn apart and a vortex was formed. In the center of the vortex, a golden beam of light fell and formed a ring of light at the ferry. "Let's go!" Lan Su turned around and said to Jian Wushuang and the others. Then he took a step forward and shot into the vortex in the sky. Jian Wushuang and the others nodded. They all circulated their divine power and turned into a flowing light that shot into the vortex. Whoosh! A moment later, the vortex closed, and the sky cleared up again. Jian Wushuang and the others had already disappeared. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. In the past 100 years, Lan Su led Jian Wushuang and the others through the universe tunnel, crossing the starry sky and rushing toward the off-world battlefield. Their speed was extremely fast, and they would often disappear into the universe passage in a flash. When they reappeared, they were already several star fields away. Gradually, they left the center of the universe and arrived at an extremely remote place. Whoosh! On a desolate planet, the figures of Lan Su, Jian Wushuang, 9th Kulpa King, Long Qing, and the other 11 supreme martial artists leaped out of the void. Where is this place? Everyone exited the cosmos passage and immediately looked around. Not a blade of grass grew on this planet, and the divine power was extremely thin. Astral storms were everywhere. There was a strong astral wind zone on this planet. The black wind was like sword energy that cut through the void. Vaguely, one could see that in this astral wind zone, there were many powerful and brutal giant astral beasts lurking, their eyes constantly shooting out red light. Lan Su raised his head and looked ahead. He turned back and said, "Everyone, after passing through this astral wind zone, we will reach the part of the off-world battlefield where our universe's forces are stationed. We can't use the universe passage here, so we have to rely on our own strength to cross this area." Everyone nodded in agreement. These giant astral beasts generally did not have the strength of an ultimate ruler, and even the most powerful ones among them had barely reached the level of a supreme. The people present were mostly high supremes, so they naturally did not take the beasts seriously. Among the crowd, only Long Qing, who was walking at the back, first looked at the astral wind zone in front of him, and then looked at the back of Jian Wushuang and 9th Kulpa King. He licked his lips, and an undetectable cold sneer flashed across his face. "Let's go." Lan Su turned around and glanced at them. Then he took a step forward and turned into a stream of light. He took the lead and shot toward the astral wind zone. Jian Wushuang and the others followed closely behind. Like a sharp knife, they directly pierced into the astral wind zone. Buzz! In the astral wind zone, gusts of black astral wind tore through the void, and terrifying sonic booms rang out in the surroundings. These black squalls were powerful enough to tear any cultivator below the supreme realm into pieces. Even though they were supremes, they still felt a little pain when crossing the zone. Fortunately, they were all the mainstays of the universe, great figures who ruled over a region. Although these black gales could cause them trouble, it did not pose much of a threat. Jian Wushuang activated his Chaos Overlord body. Suddenly, the divine patterns on his body glowed, and his body emitted a bright golden light. The strong wind that was like a sharp knife suddenly became gentle like a spring breeze. Roar! Roar! The giant astral beasts hid in the astral winds and roared. These giant beasts were all made up of meteorites. Other than having the instinct to kill, they had almost no fear. Jian Wushuang did not even need to draw his sword. With a casual punch, the power of thousands of mountains was enough to crush a giant astral beast. The others also unleashed their own techniques, and in an instant divine techniques shot out and bombarded indiscriminately, crushing the giant astral beasts in an instant. Gradually, Jian Wushuang and the others entered the depths of the astral wind zone. Lan Su walked in front and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, be careful. Not far ahead is the most dangerous place in the astral wind zone. There is an astral beast king. If there is only one, it is not a big deal. However, if it causes a beast tide, it will pose a threat to us. Therefore, everyone, please keep your voices down and don't make any noise. We don't want to provoke the astral beast king." Everyone nodded in agreement. Whoosh! The group speed was not slow, and they soon reached the depths of the astral wind zone. They could see giant astral beasts that were several times larger than before, lying in the astral wind and sleeping. Waves of powerful auras exuded from their bodies. Even though everyone was a supreme expert, they still felt a slight sense of pressure. Lan Su walked in front and turned around to make a shush gesture, indicating for the crowd to not make a sound. Just as Jian Wushuang walked past an astral beast king, bang! Suddenly, a black light wave was shot out by Long Qing, who was at the back, and it hit the astral beast king beside Jian Wushuang. Boom! In an instant, the astral beast king's body exploded and black blood splattered on Jian Wushuang. Roar! Roar! In an instant, the entire astral wind zone fell into chaos. Countless giant astral beasts woke up, opened their eyes, and stared at Jian Wushuang. They could sense the aura of Jian Wushuang killing their own kind. In an instant, countless astral beasts pounced on Jian Wushuang. Long Qing! Lan Su's face darkened. He turned to Long Qing and said, "Long Qing, what's the meaning of this? I've told you again and again not to disturb the giant astral beasts. Did you hear me?" The others also frowned. "I didn't do it on purpose. I was just careless." Long Qing spread his hands and said fearlessly, "If Cosmos God was here, he would naturally not dare to act presumptuously. However, this Lan Su was merely a disciple of Cosmos God, and his cultivation was inferior to his. Even though he did not wish to offend Lan Su, he did not have much fear either." Clang! The Tarot Divine Sword was instantly unsheathed, and a sharp sword pressure spread out. Jian Wushuang was expressionless, but he sneered in his heart. He had long guessed that Long Qing would set him up here. Slash! A giant beast roared and charged at Jian Wushuang. An extremely sharp sword light slashed down. This sword split the entire astral wind zone in spectacular fashion, and the vast sky was directly torn into two sides. Roar! The astral beast king, which was on par with a supreme realm cultivator, was cut in half from head to tail, and countless drops of divine blood fell. However, Jian Wushuang's sword did not make the beasts retreat. Instead, they rushed toward Jian Wushuang in a rage. In just a few breaths, Jian Wushuang was drowned in the huge beast tide. Ninth Culpa King, 9 Stars Saint, and the others frowned. They were about to help when they saw Lan Su's expression turn ugly and say, "Don't do anything. Let Jian Wushuang deal with it himself. Otherwise, it will only trigger a bigger beast tide and all of us will be dragged into it." As soon as he finished speaking, he gave Long Qing a cold look, and a touch of disgust flashed in his eyes. Roar! Jian Wushuang, who was submerged in the beast tide, kept slashing with the Tarot Divine Sword. Every time he slashed, he killed a giant astral beast. As expected, killing can increase the power of the Tarot Divine Sword. In the center of the beast tide, Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he smiled. Ever since he had obtained the tarot scabbard, He had discovered that the Tarot Divine Sword's power would increase with each kill. The eye on the hilt of the sword would become even more demonic. The more powerful the enemy he killed, the more powerful the Tarot Divine Sword would be. For example, after he had killed Supreme Yuding, he felt that the power of the Tarot Divine Sword had increased by at least 10%. Although it seemed to be only 10% to Jian Wushuang, 10% of his power was already a huge improvement. Most importantly, with the Tarot Scabbard, he did not have to worry about the Tarot Divine Sword absorbing too many impurities that would affect its quality. This was because all it needed to do was to nourish it in the Tarot Scabbard for a while, and the impurities would be cleared. Seeing the giant astral beasts, Jian Wushuang was naturally excited. He was originally thinking about how to trigger a beast tide and kill it with a legitimate reason to increase the power of the Tarot Divine Sword. He did not expect Long Qing to send the beast tide directly into his hands. However, the number of astral beast kings in this area was limited. In just a few minutes, all the astral beast kings were killed. Ordinary astral beasts were not of much use to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang sheathed his sword and walked out of the center of the beast tide with an indifferent expression. Looking at Jian Wushuang's unscathed appearance, Long Qing could not help but feel bored. He shook his head and said, "What astral beast king? They're completely useless." Lan Su heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that Jian Wushuang was fine. He then stared at Long Qing coldly and said, "I advise some people, if they bring their personal grudges to the off-world battlefield, don't blame me for reporting it to my master and punishing the family behind them." Then, he snorted coldly and led the group to cross the other side of the astral wind belt. A moment later, Jian Wushuang and the other 11 supreme experts passed through the astral wind zone safely. In the void, a vast camp appeared in front of everyone. "We're here." Lan Su stopped and smiled. "Everyone, our campsite is right in front." Hearing this, everyone could not help but look at each other, their faces full of curiosity. From time to time, supreme experts could be seen walking around in a hurry. Among them, there were many supreme with weak auras and injured divine bodies. Was that Supreme Bayan? Didn't he disappear for hundreds of chaos cycles? And that person over there, is he the once famous Supreme Qianfang? The entire universe thought he had fallen. I didn't expect him to be in the off-world battlefield wars the entire time. The one whose divine body was on the verge of being shattered just now was Supreme Kangwu, right? Back then, when Supreme Kangwu was at his peak, he was actually injured so severely here. It seems like the Void Warriors of the Void Universe are not easy to deal with. Everyone's faces could not help but surge with a serious expression. At this moment, a primary Supreme Realm Divine General rushed over and cupped his hands. "Lord Lan Su, Cosmos God has been waiting in the main hall for a long time. He ordered me to bring all of you to the main hall to hear the announcement the moment I see you." "Yes." Lan Su did not dare to delay. He quickly led Jian Wushuang and the others toward the main hall. In the main hall, Cosmos God sat on the main seat. However, he appeared much more exhausted than he had been during the Universe Great Clan gathering. When Jian Wushuang saw Cosmos God again this time, he had more respect for him. If not for Cosmos God's efforts to turn the tide back then, the entire universe would have been destroyed by the Void Warriors of the Void Universe. Furthermore, over the past tens of thousands of chaos cycles, Cosmos Gods had been stationed in the off-world battlefield while teaching others without discrimination, nurturing a large number of experts within the universe. It could be said that a large part of the reason why the entire universe could be so stable today was due to Cosmos God. "We pay our respects to Lord Cosmos God." The 11 supreme martial artists all knelt on the ground and cupped their hands. "No need to be so polite." Cosmos God chuckled and stretched out his hand to support them. Instantly, a gentle force gushed out and helped everyone up. Following that, Cosmos God surveyed the crowd and said, "I believe everyone has some understanding of the Void Universe by now, right?" The crowd muttered and nodded. "Well, I won't go into detail about the Void Universe. I'll tell you about the situation in the off-world battlefield first." At this point, Cosmos God's face turned solemn. With a wave of his right hand, an image appeared out of thin air and was displayed before everyone. In this scene, A 30-foot-long crack in the void stood in the void like a pair of mysterious doors. Countless monsters with terrifying appearances crawled out of the cracks in the void while roaring. Some of these monsters had 3 heads and 6 arms, some had tails and huge mouths, and some had eyes all over their bodies. Their auras were completely different from Jian Wushuang and the other ordinary Supremes, but their strength far exceeded that of Supremes of the same realm. Outside the crack, a team of Supreme experts led by an invincible Supreme Cultivator was fighting against these monsters. The battle was extremely tragic. From time to time, Supreme experts could be seen dying. The famous Supreme experts who usually acted tyrannically in the depths of the universe were dying like raindrops on the battlefield. No one retreated, no one was afraid, and everyone fought to the last moment. The hall was completely silent. Before coming here, no one would have thought that the off-world battlefield would be so tragic. 5,000 years ago, for some unknown reason, the crack in the void suddenly became bigger, and a large number of cultivators of the void poured out. These cultivators of the void didn't fight on their own like before, but instead gathered together. If I'm not wrong, they can move freely. They should be from a force in the void universe under the command of one person. Cosmos God said in a deep voice, his eyes filled with solemnness. Everyone's expression changed slightly. According to what Cosmos God said, the attacking void warriors of the void universe were from a single sect. It was not difficult to deduce that the power of the opposite universe far exceeded their imagination. After all, they had gathered all the top forces in the universe to defend against the void universe's attack. In other words, this universe could only compete with one sect in the void universe. Seeing the change in everyone's expressions, Cosmos God continued, "That's not all. The main thing is that the crack is getting bigger and bigger. I'm afraid it won't be long before the crack opens completely and forms a passage. At that time, I'm afraid that the void universe on the other side will attack us with all its troops. If we fail in this defense, the entire universe will fall into a catastrophe." Hiss! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. One of the supreme martial artists asked, "Lord Cosmos God, could it be that even you are unable to exterminate these void warriors?" Cosmos God glanced at him and said in a deep voice, 3,000 years ago, a huge black arm bound by chains stretched out from the crack in the void. I exchanged a blow with the black arm. Although I forced it back, I could sense that the owner of the black arm was not much weaker than me. In fact, they might even be on par with me. As soon as these words were spoken, it was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire in everyone's hearts. Even Jian Wushuang's face was extremely solemn. Looking at everyone's nervous expressions, Cosmos God could not help but chuckle. Of course, things are not beyond salvation. All we need to do now is to resist the attack of the void universe, and I'll look for the heaven-suppressing divine flag, one of the 7 supreme great ancestral weapons. Once I find the heaven-suppressing divine flag, there's a high chance that I'll be able to seal the crack in the void completely. Alright, you all know the situation in the off-world battleground. Remember, don't spread what I just said. Otherwise, the universe will get shocked and people will panic. Before the people of the void universe even attacks, our universe will collapse on its own. After Cosmos God finished speaking, he turned to Lan Su and instructed, "Lan Su, now you will separate them and put them into the 9 teams. They will be under the command of the 9 teams." "Yes, this disciple will do as you command." Lan Su quickly cupped her hands and nodded. She led Jian Wushuang and the other 11 supreme experts to join the 9 teams in the camp. In the off-world battlefield, Cosmos God was in charge of the overall situation. He was in charge of the base camp, and there were a total of 9 teams under him. Each team was led by an invincible supreme, and there were 2 vice-captains under the captain. The 2 vice-captains were usually half-invincible supreme experts or top supreme experts. Lan Su led the group and broke them up, joining the 9 teams. Jian Wushuang was assigned to Team 7. The campsite of Team 7 was in a lush bamboo forest. Lan Su did not send Jian Wushuang in personally. Instead, he informed Jian Wushuang that Lord Cosmos God had already sent a voice transmission to Team 7 and told Jian Wushuang to go in and report himself. Before leaving, Lan Su kindly reminded Jian Wushuang that although the leader of Team 7, Supreme Black Source, had a bad temper, he was not a bad person. If there was any disagreement, he asked Jian Wushuang to be more tolerant. Supreme Black Source? Jian Wushuang was dressed in a black robe. His right hand was holding the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword hanging from his waist as he walked into the bamboo forest step by step. He was no stranger to Supreme Black Source. There were not many invincible Supremes in the universe, and almost every one of them was a world-shaking and glorious existence. As for Supreme Black Source, he was one of the most famous martial artists among the invincible Supremes. If Supreme Tarot was the #1 sword god of all time, then Supreme Black Source was the #1 saber god of all time. 8,000 chaos cycles ago, he had reached the invincible Supreme level. However, he had always been a loner. Hence, he did not leave behind any orthodoxy or power in the cosmos. The cosmos did not know much about him. The bamboo leaves fell one by one. The deeper he went, the wider the path in the forest became. Not long after, a bamboo house appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. The door of the bamboo house opened, and more than 10 supreme martial artists sat cross-legged at the door. They were all wearing the same white robe. When they saw Jian Wushuang, their eyes were full of curiosity and they kept looking at him up and down. Although they had been in the off-world battlefield, they had heard of Jian Wushuang. He seemed to be the #1 genius in the universe and had the power to fight above his level. They were skeptical about this. Jian Wushuang also sized them up. There were a total of 20 supreme experts, all of whom were at least intermediate supreme realm. Among them, there was a top supreme realm and a half-invincible supreme realm. Their robes were also different from the other supreme experts. Although they were also wearing white robes, there were golden threads sewn at the corners of their robes. These two should be the vice-captain of Team 7. Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank slightly. The two of them had a murderous aura. With just a glance, he could feel a shocking killing intent. Jian Wushuang continued to raise his head and looked at the deepest part of the bamboo forest. There was only one person standing there. The man was tall and burly. He carried a long black saber on his shoulder and wore a white cloak. The back of the cloak was embroidered with the words, Team 7, with black threads. His back was facing Jian Wushuang. Just by standing there, he was like a mountain in front of them, and a huge pressure spread out. The next moment, the man slowly turned around. A square face with long scars and an imposing aura appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. This person was none other than the captain of Team 7, the invincible Supreme Black Source. Supreme Black Source had entered the Tao with the saber, and he had once been an invincible Supreme who had shaken the 9 heavens and 10 lands. His body was filled with monstrous killing intent. Jian Wushuang only met his eyes for a moment and he felt an extremely terrifying and suffocating cold killing intent. With one look, one could tell that this person was definitely a super expert who had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Jian Wushuang. Supreme Black Source eyelids lifted slightly as he looked at Jian Wushuang expressionlessly. Supreme Master Black Source. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands slightly in salute with an indifferent expression. Supreme Black Source nodded his head, then said, Jian Wushuang, I've heard of you. You seem to be the #1 genius in the universe now, right? I don't care how talented you are, but let me warn you first. Once you enter the off-world battlefield and become my subordinate, don't bring your arrogance as the #1 genius here. You only need to know 2 things here, and that is to obey and survive. Do you understand? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. Seeing Supreme Black Source in different expression, he nodded and said, Don't worry, I understand. Yes, this is for your own good. Supreme Black Source noticed Jian Wushuang's expression. Unlike the other geniuses, Jian Wushuang's face was not filled with disapproval the moment he gave the warning. Thus, his expression softened and he nodded. All right, Rongya, bring Jian Wushuang to change into the robes of Team 7. Yes, Captain. One of the 2 vice-captains, Supreme Rongya, who was a peak supreme and had short hair, replied respectfully. He then looked at Jian Wushuang and said with a smile, Supreme Wushuang, This way, please. I'm sorry to trouble you. Jian Wushuang nodded at him. After a while, under the guidance of Supreme Rongya, Jian Wushuang quickly changed into the clothes of Team 7. Like the others, he wore a plain white robe with the words Team 7 embroidered in black thread on the chest. Supreme Wushuang, please don't take what Captain just said to heart. He's a straightforward person, and he didn't mean to pick on you. Every single one of us who just joined Team 7 received some pointers from him because he was afraid that we'd lose our lives on the battlefield due to our drive and lack of composure. Supreme Rongya said with a smile. Jian Wushuang nodded to show that he understood. The two of them chatted as they walked. Basically, it was Supreme Rongya who introduced them while Jian Wushuang listened quietly. He nodded from time to time to indicate that he understood. Jian Wushuang had a good impression of Supreme Rongya after their conversation. He did not think that he was overbearing just because his position and cultivation were higher than Jian Wushuang's. On the contrary, he was rather gentle. All right, Jian Wushuang, your bedroom is in front of us. If there is no war, the team has no restrictions on the individual. You can cultivate in peace. However, if there is a war and you receive a letter from Captain Blacksource, you must gather at once no matter what you have to do. Otherwise, it is not easy to extinguish Captain Blacksource's thunderous anger. After saying that, Supreme Rongya handed Jian Wushuang a token and left. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes, pushed open the door of his bedroom, and walked in. This chamber occupied a large area. In the center of the chamber was a futon with an array drawn beside it. It could help the cultivators sitting on the futon to quickly recover their divine power. Creak. Jian Wushuang closed the door and sat on it with his legs crossed. He was deep in thought. Since I'm already here, I'll just take things as they are. The off-world battlefield is filled with danger, and even invincible supremes face the risk of dying. The level of danger is far beyond what the universe can compare to. Right now, I'm still too weak. I have to think of a way to increase my strength first. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. He then closed his eyes and began to condense his strength in order to break through to the intermediate supreme realm. At the same time, Ninth Culpa King, Long Qing, and the others had also settled down. Among them, Long Qing had even reached the sky with a single step and directly joined Team 3, making up for the position of the fallen vice-captain of the third team and becoming the vice-captain. Time flew by and 60 years passed. At the same time, 1,000,000 miles away from the universe camp, a crack that was like a vertical eye and was about 100 feet long kept twisting. An aura that was completely different from this universe was being taken out of it. The space in front of the crack had turned into hell. Ha 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 ha. A bunch of weak and pitiful trash. A monster with a height of 10,000 meters and a naked upper body laughed madly. It had no head or neck, and its face was on its stomach. Boom, boom, boom. Scarlet shockwaves were like bombs that exploded everywhere. On the left shoulder of this headless monster, there were 6 long scars that looked like sharp claws. It was particularly evil and ferocious. 6 scar-level Void Warrior. Team 8, who was in charge of guarding the Void Crack, let out a scream of extreme shock. A 5-scar Void Warrior corresponded to a half-invincible Supreme Expert in this universe, while a 6-scar Void Warrior corresponded to an invincible Supreme Expert. Zerowood Supreme, the captain of Team 8, held a divine spear that could tear the sky in his hand. His expression was extremely grave. Follow my lead. Zerowood Supreme spoke out coldly in the next moment. Taking a step forward, he transformed into a streak of light that shot toward the headless monster. Yes! Behind him, more than 10 Supreme Experts suppressed the fear in their hearts and used their own techniques to fly into the sky. 8-part General. Eat this bunch of trash. Upon seeing this, the eyes of the headless monster on its chest flickered with excitement. Taking a heavy step forward, it stretched out its large hand and grabbed at Zerowood Supreme. Behind him, 8 figures walked out side by side from the darkness. Hiss, hiss, hiss. It's really delicious. A monster with 3 snake heads and the lower half of a human's body stuck out its tongue at the same time. Kakeek. The taste of meat is really intoxicating. An extremely fat ball-like monster with a cracked mouth that extended all the way to the back of its ears laughed sinisterly. Kill! Kill them! A strange man who looked like a warrior with bull horns but had thick, sharp fangs roared in excitement. The fighting will in his eyes were crazed to the extreme. These 8 people were all extremely strange. On their left shoulders, several long scars were shining. The one with the least long scars was a man with an extremely pale face and black eyeshadow under his eyes. He also had 2 long scars. In other words, the weakest of the 8-part generals was an intermediate supreme martial artist. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, the 8 generals' figures flashed and disappeared behind the headless monster, charging toward Team 8. Ah! In an instant, countless miserable howls sounded. An intermediate supreme martial artist exploded into a mist of blood as the headless monster's palm brushed past him. His body and soul were destroyed. The starry sky was dyed red. Damn it! Zero Wood Supreme's face turned gloomy as the coiling dragon divine spear in his hand slashed out in all directions. The chilling spear light was enough to cause several tens of stars to explode at the same time. Boom! As the spear shot out, a massive hole instantly appeared in the vast sky, while a series of sonic booms instantly rang out. It was as though the spear that Zero Wood Supreme had used was not a spear, but a 9-clawed divine dragon that was roaring arrogantly at the heavens and earth. Under the spear, the entire world would have to bow down. Ha ha ha! Good! I'll eat you! The headless monster laughed even louder. A pitch-black wave of destruction condensed in front of his chest. Void! Explosion! The universe base. Bastard! The usually amiable expression on the face of Cosmos God was completely different this time around. His eyes were extremely cold. Cosmos God stood up and looked up at the endless void. In his eyes, countless great Daos evolved. Dao radiances circulated and formed yin and yang. His gaze pierced through the endless void and saw the tragic battlefield outside the void crack. A cold voice came out of his mouth. Pass on my orders. Teams 6 and 7. Head to the cosmic rift immediately to reinforce Team 8. Yes, sir. Lan Su's expression was solemn. He knew that this was a serious matter. Team 7 was stationed at the campsite, in Jian Wushuang's bedroom. Supreme Wushuang, get up immediately and head to the main hall as soon as possible. This is an urgent matter. A voice rang in Jian Wushuang's mind like muffled thunder. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and a trace of regret flashed across his face. He was so close to breaking through to the intermediate supreme realm. At that time, his combat strength would have another upgrade. Forget it. Jian Wushuang shook his head. He understood that Supreme Black Source had summoned them in such a hurry. Something urgent must have happened on the off-world battlefield. Without any delay, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and disappeared from the room as if he had used spatial bending. Everyone's here? Supreme Black Source had an unsightly look on his face. He swept his gaze across the faces of the squad members in front of him, and only after seeing that everyone had already gathered did his expression lighten up a little. Everyone, Lord Cosmos God has ordered us to rush to the tear in the void immediately, Supreme Black Source said in a low voice. As soon as these words fell, everyone could not help but look at each other. Captain, why is it so urgent this time? Hasn't that void rift been very stable recently? What happened? One of the team members asked doubtfully. Supreme Black Source turned to look at him upon hearing this. Taking a deep breath, he replied, "There is chaos in the crack in the void. A 6-scar level void warrior is leading a team and rushing out." What? 6 scars? It's been a few chaos cycles since a 6-scar level creature appeared, right? If I'm not mistaken, Zero Wood Supreme's teammate should be patrolling the void rift right now. Wouldn't that mean they're finished? Everyone's expression changed. Supreme Black Source's expression was heavy. Upon hearing this, he nodded and slowly replied, "That's right. According to the news sent over by Lord Cosmos God, Team 8 has almost been completely annihilated. Only Zero Wood Supreme, a vice-captain, and a few other team members are left defending the place." After saying this, Supreme Black Source took a deep breath and said no more. All right, there's no time to waste. You all should quickly set off with me to reinforce Team 8. Let's try to kill all the Void Warriors that came out of the Void Rift in the off-world battlefield. Yes. Everyone responded with a loud yes, and 3-inch battle light shot out from their eyes. Jian Wushuang's eyes also flickered, and his eyes were full of fighting intent. He remembered that the Devouring Emperor, who had killed Supreme Tarot, was from the Void Universe. Since he had received Supreme Tarot's inheritance, he would have to kill the Devouring Emperor sooner or later to fulfill Supreme Tarot's last wish. Thus, it would be best for him to familiarize himself with the Void Universe's combat style. Furthermore, Jian Wushuang was also in need of a battle to be the last stepping stone to break through to the intermediate Supreme Realm. Let's go. Suppress the chaos of war. Supreme Black Source waved his hand, transforming into a black wave that soared into the skies and headed straight for the off-world battlefield. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang and the others executed their own divine skills and followed closely behind. Boom! 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 Ha 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 ha! Go die 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 die! The headless monster laughed maniacally as red shock waves shot out from his palm. These red shock waves were like bombs that exploded in the starry sky, causing the entire sky to shake and be riddled with holes. Fortunately, this battle happened on the off-world battlefield. Otherwise, if it happened in the depths of the universe, with this person's terrifying power, the entire universe and even thousands of star fields would be destroyed by him. Damn it! Supreme Zerowood was half-kneeling as he stepped on a meteorite, his chest heaving up and down violently. The coiling dragon divine spear in his hand, which had been refined from the bones and dragon souls of the 3rd-generation dragons, had already been broken into 2. Captain, what do we do now? We can't hold on much longer, the vice-captain of Team 8, Supreme Qingguang, said in a low voice. Supreme Zerowood turned his head to take a look, and his face instantly turned extremely ugly to behold. Team 8 had almost been completely annihilated. Apart from the vice-captain, Supreme Qingguang, there were only 2 members left alive. These 2 were also seriously injured, and their divine bodies were on the verge of collapse. They could die at any moment, and they had no combat power to speak of. After taking a deep breath, Supreme Zerowood asked in a deep voice, "Is there any news from Lord Cosmos God's side?" Supreme Qingguang nodded his head and quickly replied, "Captain, Lord Cosmos God said that he has already sent out Teams 6 and 7. They are currently on their way here. Sui Shi and Black Source are coming?" Hearing those words, Supreme Zerowood's expression relaxed slightly. Taking a deep breath, he spoke out with a voice filled with killing intent. "Hold on for a few more incense sticks. I'm going to bury all these monsters here." Boom! Supreme Divine Technique, One Thought Divine Kingdom. Supreme Zerowood clenched his fists tightly, causing countless black chains to spread out from him, forming an eternal kingdom. "Come in." Supreme Zerowood made a grabbing motion with his right hand and immediately pulled the 5-scar headless monster into his one-thought divine kingdom. Kill! As for the vice-captain, Supreme Qingguang, his killing intent also burst out. He displayed a supreme divine ability that could destroy the heavens and earth and blasted it toward the 8-part generals. Thud, thud, thud. Supreme Black Source took the lead, walking at the very front. Jian Wushuang and the other 20-plus Supremes followed closely behind, constantly performing teleportation techniques as they leaped and flickered in the void. About half an incense's time later, buzz! Supreme Black Source stomped his foot forward, causing a white wave to form as he came to a complete halt. The spatial rift is right in front of us. Everyone, be careful. He took a deep breath and looked up. With one look, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Not far ahead, beside a crack that looked like a vertical eye, it had turned into a purgatory of Azura. A large amount of divine blood floated in the void, and there were divine power fluctuations everywhere after the death of a Supreme. A strange man with 3 snake heads was biting a Supreme in his mouth, chewing and tearing. The Supreme martial artist had not died yet. He looked into the distance with a dazed look, his eyes filled with despair. On the other side, the headless monster grabbed Supreme Zero Wood's head with its large hand, and it lifted him up as if he were a little chick, repeatedly bombarding him in the air. Weak, 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 weak. You guys are too weak. The headless monster's hands pulled viciously, tearing Supreme Zero Wood into two and throwing him to the side as if he was a sack. Crash. Before Supreme Zero Wood's divine body could be resurrected again, the headless monster had already strode forward. It raised its huge foot and stomped down on Supreme Zero Wood's divine body. You dare! Upon seeing this, Supreme Black Source was instantly enraged. Die! His right foot stomped down and turned into a pitch-black blade energy that could tear the sky and the earth apart and cut through the sun and moon. The blade light of his saber crossed 100,000 miles, cutting across the galaxy and sweeping away the sun and moon. Ding! Ding! In an instant, the saber ruthlessly struck the headless monster's right leg, which was about to stomp down. A crescent-shaped blade light flashed, and with a tearing sound, the headless monster's entire right leg was instantly cut off. Roar! The headless monster roared in pain and took a few steps back. Zero Wood, can you hold on? Supreme Black Source reached out and helped Supreme Zero Wood up. Zero Wood had just finished regrouping his divine body. Black Source, this guy is very difficult to deal with. Supreme Zero Wood panted slightly, a solemn expression on his face. Another one has come. The eyes of the human face on the chest of the headless monster flickered as it continued to examine Supreme Black Source. Whip! Countless tentacles poured out of the cut wound on his right leg. Then, with a flash of light, these tentacles condensed into a huge right leg. His injuries instantly recovered. Let's go, he said. The headless monster snorted coldly and turned around to enter the spatial rift again. Behind him, the 8-part generals also sneered and shook their heads. You still want to leave after killing our people? A clear and cold voice resounded in the void. Then, a thin young man in a white robe walked out from the dark void and cut off the headless monster's path. On the back of the white cloak, the big and dazzling words Team 6 were embroidered with black thread. The captain of the 6th team, Supreme Sui Shi, had arrived. Behind him, more than 10 team members slowly walked out side by side. 9 Stars Saint joined Team 6. He nodded at Jian Wushuang and called him Alliance Master. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. He knew that it was an urgent matter and it was not the time to chat, so he told him to stay alive. Oh! The human face on the chest of the headless monster turned around and looked back at Supreme Sui Shi. Then, it turned to look at Supreme Black Source. Not only was he not afraid, but the corners of his mouth curled up into an excited arc as he laughed in a low voice. Interesting, very interesting. The next moment, he suddenly raised his head and laughed wildly. 8-part generals, eat them! Boom! Countless amounts of energy condensed in the center of his palms, and a huge mouth actually grew out from his palms. As the mouth opened, a scarlet cannonball of light instantly condensed and shot out towards Supreme Black Source. Clang! Supreme Black Source swept out with his massive saber, sending a cannonball flying as he coldly snorted, Team Savine, kill! Yes, sir. The members of Team 7 roared and used all kinds of divine techniques to kill the 8-part generals. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Among the 8-part generals, the monster with 3 snake heads but a human body suddenly stuck out his tongue and laughed. There's more food coming to our door. He squinted his eyes, his face full of greed. His dark green pupils twisted and turned, his gaze constantly sweeping across everyone's faces. Finally, his eyes fell on Jian Wushuang. Interesting. Such a weak little guy dares to come and find trouble with us? Bang! Bang! He took a step with his right foot and suddenly turned into a shadow, rushing toward Jian Wushuang. In just a breath's time, the 3-headed snake monster had already appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. It opened its mouth wide enough to swallow the sun and moon snake and bit at Jian Wushuang fiercely. Countless foul-smelling gales blew over. 4 scars? So he has the strength of a top supreme martial artist. Jian Wushuang's expression was grave and the tarot divine sword appeared in his hand. The strength of these void warriors far exceeded their corresponding realms. Although this three-headed snake monster was only a top supreme martial artist, it was far more terrifying than ordinary top supreme realm experts. Even Jian Wushuang did not dare to let his guard down. Slash! Just as Jian Wushuang raised the Tarot Divine Sword and prepared to fight the three-headed snake monster, Supreme Rongya had already taken the initiative to attack. He swept his right foot across and smashed the three snake heads that were biting at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, your cultivation realm is still too low. You are no match for him. Leave him to me. Supreme Rongya glanced at Jian Wushuang and then fixed his gaze on the snake-headed man. His face was filled with fear. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded and did not refuse. At this critical moment, it was not the time for him to show off. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Are you in a hurry to come up and court death? The corners of the three-headed snake monster's mouth curled into a mocking smile as it looked at Supreme Rongya. A cruel glint flashed in its eyes. Supreme Rongya was clearly a realm higher, but he did not show the slightest fear. On the contrary, his eyes were filled with greed. Baidu, I'll leave that kid to you, the three-headed snake said to the pale-faced young man with black eyeshadow. This person had the weakest cultivation among the 8 generals, but he also looked the most like a human. All right, he said. Baidu tilted his head. He looked numb and stiff. Buzz. Countless black light waves condensed in his hand, forming a thin sword. The next moment, 2 bursts of void power exploded under Baidu's feet. He charged forward like a white lightning bolt and struck at Jian Wushuang. Void power can be used like this? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and the Tarot Divine Sword slashed down instantly. Clang! The Tarot Divine Sword and the sword formed from the void power collided, and the thin void power sword was instantly shattered. Bang! Bang! Jian Wushuang twisted his neck and punched out with his right fist. As if he was pushing a sun, countless bright golden lights gathered on his right fist and it landed heavily on Baidu's face. Boom! In an instant, Baidu's body was sent flying as if he had been hit by a giant hammer. His entire head exploded from the punch. Void warrior, that's all you've got? Jian Wushuang was expressionless. Baidu was a void warrior with 2 scars, which was equivalent to the power of an intermediate supreme. Even if his power was far beyond that of an intermediate supreme, he would only be a top supreme. Jian Wushuang no longer took top supreme beings seriously. Is that so? Countless thick tentacles emerged from his neck, and he was back to normal in the blink of an eye. Oh? The speed of recovery is much faster than us. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with slight surprise, and then he looked interested. Come on. Let me see how strong you void warriors are. Don't you let me down. Bang. Jian Wushuang soared into the sky, and a majestic sword pressure spread out with him as the center. The battle between the 2 sides had entered its most intense state. Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi attacked at the same time, killing the headless monster from the front and back. When 2 invincible supremes joined forces, it was not as simple as 1 + 1. Either one of them had the terrifying power to flatten the universe and destroy a force. At this moment, as the 2 of them joined forces, the entire starry sky exploded, as if the universe was being reconstructed and a chaotic world was being opened up. There were no words that could describe the power of the 2. In their hands, the sun and the moon were just balls of mud that they could play with their fingers. The galaxy that pressed across the sky was just a stream that flowed under their feet. They could overturn the entire universe with a casual move. Even a slight fraction of the power of their divine techniques was enough to flatten countless stars. Although the headless monster was strong, it could even be said that it had the ability to suppress either one of the 2. However, when the 2 of them joined forces, it was immediately pushed back and could only roar. On the battlefield, terrifying divine techniques exploded one after another as saber and sword lights tore through the sky. If someone from the depths of the universe were to see this scene, they would definitely exclaim that this was a world-ending battle. With the addition of Team 6 and 7, the 8-part generals who had been able to crush the enemy easily were immediately contained and the situation was reversed. Among them, other than the headless monster, the one with the highest cultivation base was the fat monster with a cracked mouth that reached the ears. The teeth in his mouth were uneven and long, but when he opened his mouth and bit down, he crushed a supreme divine weapon that was coming at him. Ha 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 ha! Void explosion! A terrifying purple light wave gushed out of his mouth like lightning, forcing back the 5 supreme experts who were attacking him. The 8-part generals were too powerful. Although each of them was facing several enemies and was firmly suppressed, they were not really in a desperate situation. They could even fight back. It could be said that any one of the 8-part generals would be an overlord of a region if they were placed in the depths of the universe. Sundering stars. A 10,000-foot blue sword light condensed in Jian Wushuang's hand. Jian Wushuang was expressionless as he casually struck down. The entire sky was being torn apart. Boom! In an instant, the void warrior named Baidu was sent flying again. How can he be so strong? Baidu's pupils contracted. This was the first time he had met someone in this universe whose cultivation was lower than him but could still suppress him. His numb and stiff face was now filled with fear. Boom! He leaped up again and the void power in his hand turned into a long sword. In a flash, he appeared above Jian Wushuang's head and slashed down. Crash. However, the sword was caught by Jian Wushuang's outstretched fingers. Countless violent void power exploded between Jian Wushuang's 5 fingers, but it could not shake him at all. I heard that you guys have an accompanying divine ability called Void Explosion. If you don't use it now, you won't have the chance anymore. Jian Wushuang shook his head and flicked his finger. Boundless power gathered at his fingertip and sent Baidu flying. He looked down at this person from above, his eyes indifferent. Okay. Then I'll do as you wish. Baidu struggled to stand up and clenched his fists in front of him. Void explosion. Boom. In an instant, the starry sky suddenly froze. Immediately, the 2 long scars on Baidu's left shoulder glowed with red light. Then, rays of energy flowed out of his body and formed a red ball of light between his palms. Buzz buzz. The space around the red ball of light seemed to be squeezed by a huge force and started to shatter. An extremely strange aura that was completely different from divine power spread out, representing destruction. Die! The next moment, Baidu raised his head and stared at Jian Wushuang. He pushed his hands forward. Roar dash! In an instant, the red light ball was like a bomb that could destroy the world. It crossed countless spaces and headed straight for Jian Wushuang. The power of this attack was hundreds of times greater than the energy of this person's previous attack, and it was even enough to threaten a half-invincible supreme. Is this the void explosion? It's no wonder that, in the same realm, a void warrior is much stronger than us cultivators. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and stared at the terrifying red ball that was approaching him at a high speed. His interest grew. Then, Jian Wushuang made a move that would make everyone go crazy. He slowly stretched out his hand and grabbed at the terrifying red ball. Supreme Wushuang, Supreme Rongya, who was engaged in an intense battle in the distance, noticed this scene. His expression instantly changed as he shouted, "Supreme Wushuang dodge!" The other 8-part generals noticed what was happening. They were surprised that Baidu was forced to use Void Explosion against a primary supreme. Then they sneered. Jian Wushuang ignored it, squinted his eyes, and continued to reach for the terrifying red ball. In less than a second, Jian Wushuang's right hand touched the terrifying red ball. Boom! A violent and twisted power suddenly burst out from Jian Wushuang's palm. Crash! Jian Wushuang's outstretched arm exploded inch by inch. Is this the power of the void? Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up as he carefully felt the power in the terrifying red ball. It was a power that was completely different from the supreme divine power. Bang bang bang! Just as the terrifying ball had blown up Jian Wushuang's entire arm and was about to hit his divine body, Jian Wushuang said, "Suppress!" In an instant, Jian Wushuang activated Chaos Overlord Body to its limit. Divine patterns that looked like twisted tree roots gushed out of the surface of his skin. The purple Chuan character between his eyebrows instantly became demonic and dazzling. Countless sword chi burst out from Jian Wushuang's body. In an instant, the terrifying round ball that was originally destructive and invincible shattered inch by inch. Countless divine power evolved on Jian Wushuang's damaged arm and regenerated it. Jian Wushuang looked at Baidu indifferently and said, "Your divine technique is indeed very powerful. It's a pity that you're too weak." After he finished speaking, the tarot divine sword reappeared in Jian Wushuang's hand. Jian Wushuang was like an unsheathed divine sword, full of sharp aura. He could feel that the tarot divine sword in his hand was already restless and ready to draw blood. "All right, die." The tarot divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand slashed at Baidu. "No! How can I die at the hands of you low-class cultivators?" Baidu shouted and turned around to rush toward the crack in the void. "You want to escape?" Jian Wushuang sneered. "Innate divine ability. Life intimidation." Boom! In an instant, the pressure of a being of the highest level descended on the area. Under this pressure, the entire starry sky seemed to stagnate, and time and space seemed to freeze at this moment. Baidu, who was running away, stopped immediately. He turned his head and looked at Jian Wushuang as if he had found something shocking. His pupils suddenly enlarged and he cried out, Why do you have his life aura?" His aura." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but frown. He took back the tarot divine sword that he had already slashed down. He stepped in front of Baidu and looked down at him. "Who's the he you're talking about? You don't know him?" Baidu was stunned for a moment, as if he was surprised by Jian Wushuang not knowing who he was talking about. But then he burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha, you actually have his aura in your body. Pathetic fellow, you're dead. They'll come for you." "What are you talking about?" Jian Wushuang frowned. He could feel that the person in front of him was not speaking nonsense. He must know something. "You want to know?" At that moment, Baidu was no longer afraid of death. Instead, there was a strange look in his eyes. "Lowly and pitiful fellow, you're now entangled with him. You'll die. No matter where you run to, those lunatics will find you. You'll definitely die." Bang! With that, Baidu's body exploded. At this moment, he actually chose to self-destruct. A terrifying power exploded and caused a white wave to sweep across the sky. Jian Wushuang retreated and waved his hands repeatedly to push away the shock wave formed by Baidu's self-explosion. "What is this person talking about?" Jian Wushuang stood with his sword in hand, his expression uncertain. The words that Baidu said before his death were like a curse, echoing in his mind. "Who is he? Who are those lunatics who wanted to kill me?" Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered with thoughts. He was not stupid. He soon realized that Baidu only said that after he used his innate ability, life intimidation. Moreover, Jian Wushuang was keenly aware that the man's first words revealed the words, "life aura." "Life aura, huh?" Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. Could be said that his master, Xianxia, had created all his special life form ability. Then, the he that this person said earlier, is it Master Xianxia? Then the lunatics he was talking about, is he the one who chased after Master in Nine Luminaries' great star field? Vaguely, Jian Wushuang seemed to feel that there was an invisible thread controlling everything in the endless darkness. The owner of the thread was his master, Xianxia. He was now 100% sure that his mysterious master was definitely inextricably linked to the void universe. Jian Wushuang even felt that there was a hidden meaning behind his master's every step. He began to wonder if his first meeting with Xianxia was a coincidence, but in fact, it was all part of his plan. In addition, Jian Wushuang was most concerned about another question. If his master was really in the next great battle, what role would he play in the battle? Forget it. The most important thing for me now is to improve my strength. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang stopped thinking and turned his eyes to look at the battlefield. As Jian Wushuang finished his battle, the other people's battles also came to an end. On the battlefield, the 8-part generals, led by the headless monster, had no choice but to retreat under the pressure by Teams 6 and 7. The headless monster tried to escape a few times, but it was stopped by Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sui Shi. One after another, saber gleams that could tear the world apart streaked across the sky, traversed the sun and moon, and suppressed all directions. Under the combined efforts of Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sui Shi, the headless monster was gradually forced into a corner and had no way out. That useless Baidu was killed. The headless monster noticed Jian Wushuang killing Baidu and snorted. It then looked at the three-headed snake and said in a low voice, "Wang Lu, before we retreat, kill the guy with the sword first." The three-headed snake was facing the joint attack of two vice-captains at the top Supreme Realm. When he heard the order, he nodded. The three heads opened their mouths at the same time and shot out hundreds of light balls, forcing the two people away. Then he rushed toward Jian Wushuang. "Hiss, hiss, hiss. You actually killed Baidu. Looks like I underestimated you." The three-headed snake's green pupils twisted and it let out a strange laugh. Jian Wushuang raised his head and looked at the man with a serious expression. On this person's left shoulder, there were 4 long scars that looked like hideous scratches, reflecting a scarlet light. The three-headed snake was far more powerful than Baidu. Jian Wushuang felt as if he had become its prey when the three-headed snake stared at him. All the hair on his body stood up. "I'll eat you." Bang! The three-headed snake turned around and disappeared. When it reappeared, it was already above Jian Wushuang. It opened its huge mouth and bit down fiercely. "It's so fast." Jian Wushuang's expression changed slightly, and he instantly slashed out with the Tarot Divine Sword. An earth-shaking roar was heard as the sword energy struck the three-headed snake's huge mouth. Bang, bang, bang. It was as if a bomb had exploded in the three-headed snake's mouth. However, the three-headed snake did not seem to feel any pain when it was hit by the sword light. Instead, it bit down hard and swallowed the sword light into its stomach. "No wonder you were able to kill Baidu. Your sword strike's power is already at the level of 3 scars. The three-headed snake sneered and changed the topic. "If I'm not wrong, you must be a heaven's favorite level figure in this universe, right?" Jian Wushuang did not speak. Instead, he gathered all his supreme divine power and was ready to attack. "Oh, you're so boring." The three-headed snake curled its lips when Jian Wushuang ignored it. Then, its dark green pupils shrank into a thin line and endless void power burst out from its body. "All right, let me eat you." Boom! The void power on the three-headed snake exploded again. It opened its huge mouth that could swallow the sun, moon, and stars and bit at Jian Wushuang fiercely. Tarot Sword Manual, second move, Daybreak. Jian Wushuang's voice was cold as he turned into a ray of golden light and slashed at the three-headed snake. The sword was so sharp that it could cut the Milky Way and split Mount Buzhou. Boom! The two of them collided with each other, and the power of the Tarot Divine Sword exploded. In an instant, the middle head of the three-headed snake was cut by half by a golden line, from its mouth to its tail. This time, the three-headed snake could not hold it in any longer and let out a low groan of pain. Jian Wushuang's figure appeared behind the three-headed snake. He did not look proud at all, even though he had cut the three-headed snake in half. Instead, his face grew more solemn. Tarot Sword Manual, third move, Dusk. Boom! In an instant, the sword technique of Dusk was activated by Jian Wushuang. With Jian Wushuang as the center, a huge pit appeared under Jian Wushuang's feet and then spread. A strong suction force came from the center of the pit and instantly pulled the three-headed snake into it. Barry! Jian Wushuang's 5 fingers that were spread out suddenly clenched. In an instant, the force of heaven and earth suddenly exploded from the pit. The force of the collision was so majestic that it could instantly crush a top supreme expert into meat paste. At this moment, the three-headed snake, which was still roaring angrily, was suddenly filled with fear. In this pit, he was like an earthworm trapped in a huge millstone. His body was instantly crushed thousands of times. In the distance, the headless monster, who had been forced into a dead end, noticed the scene, and its expression instantly turned extremely ugly. For the first time, he looked at Jian Wushuang with respect. As for Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sui Shi, they also saw Jian Wushuang suppressing the three-headed snake, and their eyes flashed with a strange light. Black Source, it seems that a monster has appeared in your team. Supreme Sway, she smiled. With the two of them working together, the headless monster had already used all its tricks. Now, it was an arrow at the end of its flight, so it was rare for him to relax a little. He can't be considered a monster. He's just a little more talented than others. He still needs more experience. There was no change in Supreme Black Source's expression. However, he was also surprised by Jian Wushuang's battle prowess. Is that so? Supreme Sway, she looked at Supreme Black Source with a smile that was not a smile and said, Black Source, why don't you transfer him to my Team 6? Get lost. Supreme Black Source glared at him without the slightest hesitation, then groaned. Let's not talk about this. Let's kill this headless monster first. Supreme Sway, she nodded her head and looked at the headless monster again. Her face was cold. Even though she had guarded the off-world battlefields for thousands of chaos cycles, she had only seen a few six-scar monsters. This was a big fish, and she definitely could not let it go. Divine Technique. 1 chi for 3 purities. Whoosh! In an instant, 3 figures that were exactly the same as Supreme Sway, she walked out from his body. On the other side, Void Explosion. The 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, felt the terrifying pressure in the dusk pit. Without any hesitation, it used its innate divine technique, the Void Explosion. In an instant, the 2 heads of the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, exploded. After the 2 snake heads exploded, they turned into pure void power energy and rushed toward the head in the middle. Roar! The 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, opened its mouth and a beam of light as thick as a bucket was instantly shot out. This terrifying light wave was extremely powerful. The moment it appeared, it pierced through the twilight pit and left a long black scar in the void. After piercing through the twilight pit, the terrifying light wave shot toward Jian Wushuang again. Come! Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and clenched the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand. The battle intent in his eyes turned into sparks and flickered to the extreme. Break! Jian Wushuang roared, and divine power that was tens of thousands of times more powerful than that of an ordinary supreme surged into his hands. Slash! In an instant, the Tarot Divine Sword transformed into a heaven-splitting sword rainbow that cut through the sun, moon, and stars. Under the strike, the Tarot Divine Sword trembled madly and let out a sound that was like the low chanting of Buddha and the weeping of gods and demons. Boom! Suddenly, the sword cut straight into Wang Lu's void explosion wave. Boom! In an instant, 2 huge shock waves spread out from the center of their battle. The entire void exploded inch by inch. Even the other supreme martial artists who were fighting in the distance were thrown off their feet by the shock wave and retreated. In an instant, the Tarot Divine Sword's dragon-like sword rainbow was locked in a stalemate with this strange light wave. Roar! Wang Lu opened his mouth and roared again. The strange light wave in his mouth grew in power again, getting gradually thicker. In an instant, Jian Wushuang was sent flying and the white robe representing Team 7 was torn apart. Void warriors are indeed very strong. Jian Wushuang stepped on the void and left 2 long traces in the air. He could not help but pant slightly. This Wang Lu was a 4-scar void warrior, which meant that he was equivalent to a top supreme in his universe. In terms of strength, he was even more terrifying than the half-invincible supreme Yuding that he had fought before. The twilight pit was broken into pieces inch by inch. Wang Lu walked out step by step, his eyes flashing with killing intent. Despicable and weak trash. Bugs. You've completely angered me. You should die. After Wang Lu finished his words, his face was filled with madness as he wanted to kill Jian Wushuang. However, at this moment, the headless monster's earth-shaking roar came from afar. Supreme Black Source stood there in the air, an aura of unparalleled might erupting from him as he barked out coldly, Divine Technique, Abyss Half-Moon Slash. Boom! In an instant, the huge black blade in his hand expanded with the wind. In just half a breath's time, it had expanded to a full 10,000 feet long, turning into a lightning black dragon with bared fangs and brandished claws. It opened its fangs and directly chopped down on the headless monster's left shoulder. Rip! The headless monster was directly torn apart by the blade, and countless drops of divine blood fell. Supreme Sway she followed closely behind. Her movements were not slow at all, and she also used her killing move. Divine Technique, 5 Spirit Sacred Armor. Boom! In an instant, countless meteors condensed out of thin air and fell like rain. Bang, bang, bang. The two of them joined forces and attacked. After a round of attacks, the headless monster's body exploded continuously, turning into countless pieces of minced meat. It had to be said that the Void Warriors from the Void Universe were extremely powerful. If they were ordinary cultivators, even if they were invincible Supremes, they would have died long ago after facing the destructive attacks of Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi. The countless pieces of flesh floating in the void started to grow tentacles again. In just a breath's time, the tentacles merged together and turned back into a headless monster. He panted heavily, and his aura had weakened significantly. The eyes of the human face on his chest were fixed on Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi. He let out a low and eerie laugh and immediately said, "You can't kill me. Is that so?" Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi were expressionless as they walked toward the headless monster. The headless monster's lips curled into a mocking smile. Then, the headless monster suddenly released an extremely powerful pressure. This pressure did not belong to him. The moment this pressure was released, Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi's expressions changed drastically. The power of this pressure was far above them. They were very familiar with this pressure. At the same time, the headless monster closed its eyes, and its expression became pious as it chanted in a low voice, "Great Void God, I'm your citizen Allah." A magical low moan came out of his mouth. The three-headed snake, Wang Lu, who had been charging at Jian Wushuang with a furious look, gave up after giving Jian Wushuang an unwilling look. He stopped and started to chant in silence like a headless giant, "Great Void God, I am your citizen Wang Lu." At the same time, the other members of the 8-part generals, the ball-shaped monster with a mouth that stretched to its lower jaw, the bull-horned warrior with thick fangs, the 8-part generals began to silently recite this magical incantation. An extremely terrifying aura gushed out of their bodies. Under this aura, be it invincible supremes like Black Source and Sway Shi or Jian Wushuang, they felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. A great horror of life and death surged up, enough to suffocate people. Bang! Bang! Muffled sounds came from the crack in the void. Walala! Immediately after that, the piercing sound of iron chains sliding across the floor could be heard. What's going on? Jian Wushuang suddenly felt a strong throbbing in his heart. It was an instinctive feeling that made him want to escape from this place immediately. It was as if an indescribable, terrifying existence was about to descend upon the world. Bang, bang, bang! The muffled sound grew louder and louder, as if the thunder god was angry and smashed the giant hammer in his hand. Boom! Suddenly, the crack in the void exploded. An extremely huge pitch-black arm bound by countless chains suddenly stretched out of the crack in the void. No words could be used to describe the black arm. The arm was so big that it completely exceeded Jian Wushuang's imagination. A fingernail alone was dozens of times larger than the sun, and a palm alone could cover several star fields. A vast, evil, and ancient aura burst out and turned into black clouds. Just the arm alone was so huge. It was hard to imagine how big the owner of the arm was. This is. In an instant, Supreme Black Source and Supreme Sway Shi were overwhelmed with shock, and their eyes were filled with shock. Jian Wushuang almost fell from the sky. He felt as if he had fallen into an icehouse and his liver and guts turned cold. This was definitely one of the most terrifying existences he had ever met. This is the arm that had fought with Lord Cosmos God back then. In the distance, the captain of Team 8, Supreme Zerowood, who had been rapidly recovering from his injuries, was immediately interrupted and cried out in shock. Boom! The next moment, the arm was raised high and slammed down on Jian Wushuang and the others. Run! Without any hesitation, Both Jian Wushuang and Supreme Black Source unleashed all the divine power in their bodies and turned into countless rays of light that shot out in all directions. However, some people's reactions were a step too slow. Bang! The two senior supreme martial artists had just flown up in streaks of light, and their palms had already slammed down fiercely. The void within 1,000,000 miles shattered at the same time. Hundreds and thousands of mushroom clouds rose from the gaps between his fingers. No! The two senior supreme martial artists only had time to let out a roar of shock and anger before they were smashed into dust. Their bodies and souls destroyed. Boom! Then, the arm was raised again, and 5 fingers as thick as the Milky Way slammed forward. This time, the palm quickly wrapped Jian Wushuang and the others. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's expression changed drastically. At the same time, the main palace of the base in the off-world battlefield. Cosmos God sat on the main seat with his eyes closed in deep thought. His 2 disciples, Lan Su and Lan Lan, stood by his side and remained silent. All of a sudden, Cosmos God's statue seemed to have sensed something, and it abruptly opened its eyes. Void God has appeared. He raised his head and stared at the crack in the void. His eyes pierced through the billions of miles of space and saw the huge black arm. Hearing this, the 2 disciples, Lan Su and Lan Lan, were shocked. Void God. That was someone who had fought with Master before. Little Su, little Lan, you guys guard the base. The expression of Cosmos God was heavy. His shoulders trembled slightly before he disappeared from the main hall. After Cosmos God left, Lan Su and Lan Lan could not help but look at each other. Their hearts started to sink. The off-world battlefield. Rumble. The entire starry sky had been blown up. The headless monster and the 8-part generals under it stood in their original positions, staring at this scene with sparks of excitement in their eyes. The second palm strike from the pitch-black arm had already arrived. In an instant, chi waves surged and countless chi activities surged. The world seemed to have fallen into doomsday and was about to be destroyed. Jian Wushuang, who was running away quickly, felt his vision go dark. When he looked up again, he saw a broad palm covering the sky and replacing the vast sky. No! In an instant, Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with anger. An unprecedented sense of life and death crisis kept ringing in his body, like an alarm bell, telling him to leave quickly. Clang! The Tarot Divine Sword appeared in Jian Wushuang's hand in an instant. At that moment, Jian Wushuang no longer held back. All the divine power in his body exploded. Boom, 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 boom. In an instant, Jian Wushuang slashed out thousands of white sword's lights to block the palm. However, it was useless. Everything was useless. The sword radiances that could cut down monstrous beings in the universe were like mosquito bites when they fell on the palm. They could not be stopped at all. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang did not intend to stay where he was. Instead, he took advantage of the impact force generated by the sword light to retreat quickly and leave the attack area of the palm. Tarot Sword Manual, 5th move, Tarot. Under the pressure of this life and death crisis, Jian Wushuang had gone completely mad and brazenly used his most powerful unique skill. Boom! In an instant, the indomitable phantom of Supreme Tarot appeared behind Jian Wushuang. The phantom was as big as a star, but in front of the arm it was only the size of a finger. It was extremely small. Slash! Jian Wushuang shouted with all his strength. In an instant, he held the Tarot Divine Sword and slashed down. The phantom behind him followed like a shadow and did the same action as Jian Wushuang. A towering and surging sword essence soared into the sky. This Tarot Sword Strike, which had defeated the half-invincible Supreme Bing Yi, slashed down on the palm that was pressing down inch by inch in the blink of an eye. Buzz! The Tarot Divine Sword directly exploded on the black palm, forming a mushroom cloud the size of a star. The palm was still majestic and unmoving as it quickly descended. Jian Wushuang's vision turned into darkness and the whole world was filled with the palm. Fortunately, the air blast from the Tarot Divine Sword attack directly formed a terrifying shock wave and spread out. Jian Wushuang was extremely fast, but the shock wave caused him to fly even faster. Boom! Finally, the palm landed. At this critical moment, Jian Wushuang brazenly used all kinds of secret skills that could improve his cultivation in a short time and increased his speed to another level. Just as the palm was about to land, Jian Wushuang roared and rolled to avoid the palm. The fingertips of the arm fell with a loud bang when they were less than 1,000 feet away from Jian Wushuang. 9 Stars Saint was also caught in the palm, and he was several meters behind Jian Wushuang. He was not so lucky. His desperate roar stopped abruptly and he was turned into dust. Alliance Master. At the last moment of his death, he looked at Jian Wushuang with eyes full of fear and desire, as if he wanted Jian Wushuang to save him. 9 stars! Jian Wushuang's eyes were instantly filled with anger. The 9 Stars Saint was a core member of the Sword Alliance and one of the most important people on the ancient path of stars. Thump! However, before Jian Wushuang could do anything, the monstrous air billow that came from the palm had already formed a shock wave and sent him flying. Like a broken gunny sack, Jian Wushuang drew a long arc in the air and fell far away. Jian Wushuang struggled to stand up from the ground. He could not suppress the blood in his mouth and spat it out. Jian Wushuang stared at the place where the palm was falling and his face was extremely gloomy. Whoosh! And that palm had already been raised again. Under the palm, nearly 10 supreme martial artists had turned into dust and smoke. They had completely fallen. Bang! Bang! This demonic godlike palm slowly lifted up, and thick, pitch-black demonic chi swirled around his 5 fingers. The third palm strike came. This palm completely covered everyone. Supreme Black Source and the others could not help but feel their scalps go numb as they watched this palm strike. More people's hearts were like dead ashes, and they completely gave up on resisting. Jian Wushuang's face was extremely gloomy. The sword move, Tarot, had completely drained all of his divine power. It was already difficult for him to launch another attack, let alone escape from the attack range of the palm. In the distance, the headless monster and the 8-part generals looked at this scene, and cruel smiles appeared on their faces. Great Lord Void God, end the lives of this group of trash. Boom! The giant hand, which was bound by black chains and had dark and shriveled skin, lifted up again and slapped down for the 3rd time. Everyone gave up, except for Jian Wushuang. No! I won't die here. Never! Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth and his eyes were filled with madness. He flipped his right hand and the Chaos Wushu Cauldron appeared in his hand. He was going to detonate the Chaos Wushu Cauldron. He wanted to control the Chaos Wushu Cauldron to self-destruct and stop this palm. All of this was too crazy and too shocking. No one could imagine the effects of a supreme great ancestral weapons' self-destruction. Hiss! Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and looked at the Chaos Wushu Cauldron in his hand. He could not bear to see it. However, in just a breath's time, this trace of reluctance was replaced by madness and determination. Rumble! This palm was getting closer and closer, covered the sky and the sun. The strong wind caused Jian Wushuang's black hair to fly in the air. The pressure from the giant palm had already cracked Jian Wushuang's chaotic, domineering body like a spider web. It's time! Just as Jian Wushuang was about to detonate the Wushu Chaotic Cauldron. Impudent! As if the Chaos Immortal King had opened his mouth, an old voice, which seemed to have traveled through the primeval universe and the ancient yellow times, suddenly exploded in the starry sky. Buzz! After the voice exploded, all the people raised their heads and looked over. They saw an extremely fast white waterfall that they could not even see with their eyes. It instantly streaked across their eyes. Whoosh! Everyone only felt a blur before their eyes, and then the waterfall appeared above their heads. It was an old man with white hair and a white beard. Behind him, lotus flowers bloomed. Lord Cosmos God! Lord Cosmos God is here! We're saved! In an instant, everyone's faces were filled with ecstasy. It was the ecstasy of surviving a disaster. Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank. He immediately put the self-exploding Chaos Wushu Cauldron back into his interspatial ring. Buzz! After the appearance of the Cosmos God, a series of violent sounds could be heard from the crack in the void. Void God, you've crossed the line. Cosmos God was expressionless. He extended his finger and tapped out at that apocalyptic palm. This finger was very ordinary. Even though Jian Wushuang gathered all the divine power in his body and focused it in his eyes, he could not see anything special about the finger. However, it was this finger that gently touched the center of the pitch-black palm, but it made the giant palm that had been crushing all the way unable to advance an inch further. Pierce! A cold voice rang out from Cosmic God. The next moment, boom! In an instant, countless bright radiances exploded. The great Tao directly materialized and turned into a rolling deity wheel. At the tip of this finger, the 6 Taos of reincarnation rose, immortal birds and cranes circled, and true dragons and phoenixes roared. Suddenly, endless celestial light fell, and countless starlight surrounded his body. The great Tao sometimes turned into the huge yin-yang 8 trigrams, and sometimes into the rolling yellow spring. It was as if the whole world was condensed in this finger. Roar! Arg! A shrill roar came from the other side of the crack in the void. Immediately after, the palm began to retract at an extremely fast speed as if it had been electrocuted. Swish! In an instant, the 8-part generals, led by the headless monster, were blown into pieces by the aftershock of this finger. The huge arm grabbed the minced meat of the 8-part generals and pulled them back into the crack in the void. Chi-chi-chi. After a few seconds, the pile of minced meat gathered together and turned back into the headless monster and the 8-part generals. Damn it! We will be back. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The guy with the sword, you're lucky this time, but you won't be so lucky next time. The aura of the headless monster and the 8-part generals had weakened to the extreme. However, even so, there was not a hint of fear on their faces. Instead, they looked at the Cosmos God with provocative expressions. The 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, looked at Jian Wushuang with a cruel look and sneered. Whoosh! In just a breath's time, the black arm wrapped around the headless monster and the 8-part generals and retreated back into the crack in the void. Everyone looked at each other. They rejoiced that they had survived the disaster, but more than that, they felt a strong sense of grievance. Do you think you can just come and go whenever you like? This time around, the usually mild-mannered Cosmos God was devoid of any expression. He was as cold as a block of ice. It was only to see his figure sway, and his entire person disappeared once more. He actually took a step and charged into the crack in the void. Lord Cosmos God. In an instant, countless people's hearts tightened. No one would have expected that Cosmos God would actually charge into the tear in the void. There's no need to worry, since Lord Cosmos God dared to head to the other universe. He naturally has the confidence to return. Supreme Black Source swept the crowd with his gaze as he spoke in a low voice. Supreme Sway, she also took a deep breath and said slowly, the owner of that arm earlier is the strongest being in the Void universe. Since he dared to cross the line to kill us, Lord Cosmos God can naturally go over and kill them too. Everyone, please calm down and wait quietly. When everyone heard this, they could not help but look at each other, then nodded and no longer spoke. To be honest, the battle with the 8-part generals was already overwhelming. However, the appearance of the giant arm instantly reversed the situation and began the massacre. It was like an adult suddenly intervening in a fight between two families' children. Everyone's heart was filled with grievance. Fortunately, Cosmos Gods had arrived. Roar! Bang, bang, bang! A huge explosion came from the crack in the void. About half an incense's time later, Cosmos God rushed out from within. In his hands, he carried the headless monster and the 8-part generals. His face was slightly pale. The incompatibility between the two universes was too great. The higher the cultivation base, the stronger the incompatibility, and the more he would be rejected by the different universes. Even he could not stay in the Void universe for too long, so he had to leave. Lord Cosmos God has returned. Lord Cosmos God, are you all right? Everyone chimed in and quickly stepped forward. This old master is fine. The Cosmos God shook his head and looked at the headless monster and the 8-part generals that were sealed by a secret technique. In the hands of Cosmos God, the headless monster and the 8-part generals, which were extremely difficult to deal with previously, were as weak as infants. Retrieval. The gaze of the cosmos god turned cold. He immediately executed his great divine technique and squeezed the 8-part generals and the headless monster into a pearl the size of a pigeon egg. You want to leave after killing someone? Did I give you permission? Cosmos God shook his head and turned his gaze toward Supreme Black Source and the others. Team 6, stay behind and guard the spatial rift. The rest of you, come back with me. Everyone looked at the 8-part generals and the headless monster that had been captured by the cosmos gods and felt as if they had let out a breath of turbid air. They were extremely pleased. Yes. Thus everyone agreed. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Under the lead of cosmos gods, everyone turned into streams of light and headed toward the main camp. Jian Wushuang's face was expressionless, but his heart was as heavy as a heavy stone. The tragedy of the off-world battleground was far beyond his imagination. One had to know that, in the depths of the universe, Supremes could suppress an area and command several star fields. There was almost nothing that could threaten the life of Supremes. However, on the off-world battlefield, the lives of Supreme martial artists were like grass. If they were not careful, they would die. In the battle just now, the total number of Supreme experts who had died in Team 6, 7, and 8 had far exceeded the number on the fingers of 2 hands. Thud! A big hand was placed on Jian Wushuang's shoulder. Jian Wushuang raised his head and saw that Supreme Black Source was looking at him. Alright, this is your first battle in the off-world battleground. Relax. It's common for Supremes to die here. Even for me, I might die one day. He patted his shoulder. A faint smile appeared on Supreme Black Source's lips as he changed the subject. You did well this time. You can go back now. Yes. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, took a step forward, and turned into a soaring sword light. He quickly headed toward the base camp. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Streaks of light streaked across the vast starry sky. Along the way, no one said a word and kept silent. He had won this battle, but it had been too tragic and moving. Jian Wushuang was expressionless and also silent. 9 Stars Saint's desperate gaze before his death kept replaying in his mind. He was not particularly close to 9 Stars Saint, but he would remember 9 Stars Saint's help with the disciples of the 9 Stars Holy Land when the 6 forces besieged the Divine Life Palace. Void God! Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. A moment later, they had arrived at the base camp outside the outer region battlefield. Other than Team 6, which was left to patrol the spatial rift, the captains of the other teams all brought their team members and stood at the entrance of the main camp to welcome everyone. It was obvious that they already knew about the war that had broken out on the off-world battlefield. It was the first time Jian Wushuang had seen a member of Team 9. Everyone walked into the base camp step by step and nodded slightly to the members of Team 8 as a form of greeting. Jian Wushuang walked at the back. Just as he was about to step into the base camp, he stopped. It's him. Jian Wushuang frowned and looked at the second team. The captain of the second team was Great Void Divine Emperor, whom he had met once in the Great Void Temple. I didn't expect him to be the captain of Team 2. Oh? This guy is here too. Great Void Divine Emperor also saw Jian Wushuang and he raised his eyebrows. Every once in a while, Cosmos God would transfer a group of Supremes from the universe to the off-world battlefield. If he had not seen Jian Wushuang today, he would not have known that Jian Wushuang had come to the off-world battlefield. Standing beside Great Void Divine Emperor was Supreme Bing Yi, who had already recovered from his injuries. He was wearing the vice-captain's white robe. He also saw Jian Wushuang and his body trembled. Jian Wushuang. It's Jian Wushuang. Then, he lowered his head, and a hysterical and sick smile appeared on his face. Very good. Jian Wushuang, I didn't expect you to come to the off-world battlefield. Hee. It's time for us to settle our scores. His chest heaved up and down violently as he laughed wildly, but he did not make a single sound. Jian Wushuang's eyes swept across Supreme Bing Ye's face, and the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Very good. His greatest enemies were all in the off-world battlefield. The hatred between them had long reached the point where they would not rest until one of them was dead. Unless one of them died, this hatred would continue. Thud. Jian Wushuang lifted his foot and continued to walk forward. Jian Wushuang, you're really lucky. You survived even when Void God attacked. An ear-piercing sound rang in Jian Wushuang's ears. Jian Wushuang turned his head and saw Long Qing, the vice-captain of Team 3 in a white robe, spreading his hands and speaking with a mocking expression. Before Jian Wushuang could reply, Long Qing shook his head and said with a smile, "But it's fine. It seems like the heavens are prepared to let you die in my hands." "Is that so?" Jian Wushuang glanced at him and then ignored him. He walked forward step by step. There was still a lot of time, and he would naturally get rid of these enemies one by one. He walked into the main palace. Cosmos God was already seated on the main seat, holding the headless monster and the pearl condensed from the 8-part generals in his hands. He swept his gaze across everyone's faces. With a wave of his right hand, a warm-colored radiance was released from Cosmos God's hand and sprinkled on everyone. In an instant, the injuries on everyone's bodies rapidly recovered, and the exhausted divine power in their bodies recovered at a rapid rate. "We thank you, Cosmos God." Immediately, everyone cupped their hands. "It's fine. It's been hard on all of you this time." Cosmos God nodded. Following that, Cosmos God waved his right hand once more. The small bead in his hand rose into the air and left his palm. Whoosh! The next moment, the headless monster and the 8-part general's figures expanded in the wind and stood in the hall. "Damned old thing! Kill!" Instantly, the headless monster and the 8-part general's faces were filled with ferocity, and they were about to shout and kill. However, with the presence of a Cosmos God, what could they do? Whoosh! With an indifferent expression, Cosmos God flicked his finger. Instantly, immortal radiance shot out from his hand and turned into a cage, trapping the headless monster and the 8-part generals. Within the cage, the headless monster rammed into the cage a few times. After realizing that it was completely unable to shake the cage, it turned to Cosmos God and licked its lips. "Cosmos God, you kept us here until now because you want to know about Lord Void God, right?" Cosmos God did not say anything. The headless monster shook its head and said, "So what if I tell you? It wouldn't be long before Lord Void God undid the seal and led an army to flatten this universe. At that time, not only will you die, but everyone in the hall will not be able to escape. The billions of living beings in your universe will become our slaves." Ha 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 ha. At this point, the headless monster laughed out loud. His face was filled with savagery, and there was no trace of fear. "You're looking for death." The expression of Cosmos God turned stern. With a flick of his finger, the headless monster's body began to melt inch by inch. In just a few breaths' time, its body and spirit were completely destroyed. Following that, Cosmos God flicked his fingers continuously, and the 8-part generals began to die one by one. In front of a Cosmos God, be it the headless monster or the 8-part generals, there was no difference. It was just like how Jian Wushuang and the others were faced with the pitch-black arm. They had no power to resist at all. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled sounds could be heard. Soon, the 8-part generals were all dead, leaving only the gloomy-faced 3-headed snake Wang Lu. Just as Cosmos God was about to kill him, the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, suddenly spoke. "I can tell you about the Void Gods and even the deployment that our universe has for you, but I have a condition." Hearing this, Cosmos God frowned and said indifferently, "What condition?" Upon hearing this, the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, revealed a cruel smile and his green pupils turned. The next moment he looked at Jian Wushuang. "I want to fight with this man. Life or death. It's up to fate." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was shocked. Whoosh! Everyone looked at Jian Wushuang. Cosmos God took a glance at Jian Wushuang before looking back at the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu. He shook his head and said, "No, change your condition." However, the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu, shrugged and shook his head. "That's a pity. Come kill me." "You think I won't?" Cosmos God snorted coldly when he heard that. Tao light circulated on his fingertips as he was about to kill him. At this moment, "Fight me? I agree. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said expressionlessly, "I accept this battle." When Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said this, the whole place fell silent. Everyone looked at Jian Wushuang in a daze. "Master, you can't. Jian Wushuang is a heaven's favorite of our universe. If anything happens to him, it will be a great loss for our universe." Supreme Blacksource's eyes flickered as well. "You can't do this. Jian Wushuang is only a primary supreme, while the three-headed snake is already a void warrior with 4 scars. According to the exchange of realms, it is already a top supreme. With the addition of the void explosion, it is comparable to a half-invincible supreme." Everyone urged. At this moment, a voice that seemed out of place rang out in the hall. "What's wrong? Once we know about the deployment of the void universe, we can respond in advance and even wait for them to come. This is a matter of great importance. What's wrong with letting Jian Wushuang fight? In my opinion, even if Jian Wushuang were to take the initiative to die, he would be doing the universe a great service, let alone letting him fight." The person who spoke was none other than the supreme expert from Cosmos Temple who had joined Team 6. Russell, Russell, Russell. Instantly, many gazes fell on him. The vice-captain of Team 6, Supreme Rongya, sneered. "Your words are so nice. Then why don't you take his place and die? As far as I know, Jian Wushuang got to where he is all by himself. He doesn't owe anyone anything, right? What do you mean by doing a great service?" Immediately, the supreme expert from Cosmos Divine Palace opened his mouth and thought for a long time before he grunted. "This three-headed snake, Wang Lu, didn't specifically look for me." When everyone heard that, they could not help but laugh. Just as they were about to say something, Cosmos God shook his head and said, "All right, be quiet." Only then did everyone shut up. Cosmos God looked at Jian Wushuang and asked in a deep voice, "Little guy, if you were to fight him, how confident are you in winning?" Jian Wushuang laughed and stretched out his hand. He grabbed at the void and said firmly, 100%. "All right." Upon hearing this, the eyes of the Cosmos God gleamed. He nodded and said, "Jian Wushuang, I'll let you represent our universe in this battle." The others still wanted to say something, but seeing that Cosmos God had already made up his mind and Jian Wushuang also looked as if he had made a solemn vow, they could only nod and say no more. On the other hand, when Wang Lu heard this, the corners of his mouth suddenly opened and he pulled out a cold smile. "Oh, I seem to have been underestimated?" Slurp. Wang Lu's forked tongue licked the corner of his mouth, and his dark green eyes narrowed with a trace of cruelty. "All right, I'll arrange the battlefield for you." Cosmos God casually tore out a tear in the void, forming a divine kingdom. The divine kingdom had blue skies and vast lands, lofty mountains, vast oceans, lakes, rivers, and mountains. It had everything. This ability to easily split the heavens and create the world was truly amazing. Following that, Cosmos God extended his right hand and grabbed Wang Lu out of thin air, throwing him into the Divine Kingdom battlefield. "Thank you, Cosmos God." Jian Wushuang cupped his hands at him, then took a step forward and turned into a flowing light, shooting into the Divine Kingdom battlefield. In the hall, Jian Wushuang and Wang Lu's figures disappeared. Instead, a scroll of mountains and rivers appeared. In the scroll, Jian Wushuang and Wang Lu were in the Divine Kingdom battlefield. Let's wait and see. Since Jian Wushuang said that he was 100% confident, he won't be wrong. Cosmos God spoke indifferently. Everyone responded respectfully and raised their heads to look at the scene with serious expressions. Within the Divine Kingdom battlefield, Jian Wushuang and Wang Lu were standing on the surface of a big lake with their hands behind their backs. The two of them did not waste any time talking and immediately started the battle. Bang! Jian Wushuang took a step with his right foot, and the entire lake was overturned, forming a huge wave that reached a height of 1,000 feet. In the middle of the waves, Jian Wushuang held the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand. He turned into a blue sword light and rushed out. Whoosh! The 1,000-foot wave was instantly broken and Jian Wushuang's figure appeared above Wang Lu's head. Slash! An ice-cold voice exploded. Jian Wushuang activated his divine power and slashed down. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Wang Lu flicked his tongue, and the image of Jian Wushuang's flying sword was reflected in his green pupils. He opened his mouth and spat out a red light wave. Whoosh! In an instant, this red light wave collided with the Tarot divine sword, creating an extremely powerful shock wave. Bang! In an instant, the shock wave spread out and razed everything within a 10,000-foot radius to the ground. Tens of millions of tons of water in the lake dried up and evaporated, turning into water vapor and forming monstrous white waves. Fortunately, this divine kingdom was created by Cosmic God, and the space was extremely stable. Otherwise, if it was placed in the outside world, it would probably be enough to shatter the void and blow up several planets. Boom! Both of them retreated. Wang Lu was smashed hundreds of feet into the ground and a huge human-shaped pit appeared. As for Jian Wushuang, he was sent flying backward. He crashed into 3 mountain peaks before he finally stopped. The move just now was just a small test between the two of them. Therefore, the two of them did not suffer any injuries. Daybreak! With his back against the mountain wall, Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot heavily and his body shot out again. He turned into a golden light and charged toward Wang Lu. Void crack! Wang Lu's 3 snake heads were stuck together. He raised his hands and clamped at Jian Wushuang fiercely. In an instant, 2 halos appeared in his hands, and he caught the golden daybreak light that was coming at him at high speed. Ding, ding, ding. The huge force pushed Wang Lu back and his feet left 2 deep scars on the ground. In his hands, countless sparks flew. Go to hell! Wang Lu sneered, and the 3 snake heads opened up to bite Jian Wushuang's head. Are you talking about yourself? Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold, and he immediately activated Chaos Overlord Body. His right foot swept across like a 9-section whip and heavily hit the snake head. Wang Lu's snake head suddenly shook, and Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to pull out the Tarot divine sword. He flicked Wang Lu away and said coldly, Tarot sword manual, 4th move, 4 seasons. Whoosh! In an instant, the entire divine kingdom battlefield twisted, and the Tarot divine sword disappeared. Crack, crack, crack. All of the divine kingdom, be it mountains, rivers, or lakes, was instantly frozen. The temperature dropped by dozens of degrees, and countless snowflakes began to fall from the sky. As far as the eye could see, the entire world was covered in white snow, as if it was covered with a white haze. It was a world of glaciers, and it was the middle of winter. What? Wang Lu raised his head and looked at the sky full of snow. His body could not help but stiffen. Buzz! A grain of snow fell on his shoulder. In an instant, a terrifying force of ice passed through his body and froze his entire shoulder. Good! In the main hall of the universe base, everyone looked at the battle scene on the screen and immediately clapped. No wonder there was news from the universe saying that Jian Wushuang was the #1 heaven's favorite, and that he had the power to fight above his level. I was skeptical before, but now it seems that the rumors were not exaggerated at all. This old man remembers that this technique was created by that fellow Tarot, right? Looking at Jian Wushuang, he has already obtained Supreme Tarot's true inheritance. In the future, he might be able to surpass Supreme Tarot and take the title of the #1 sword master in history. It's been a long time since I've seen someone with such a profound understanding of the sword Tao in the universe since Supreme Tarot. I really miss it. This kid's future is limitless. In my opinion, I'm afraid it won't be long before the Tarot Divine Sword changes its name to the Wushuang Divine Sword. The crowd laughed. In the beginning, they were quite worried. However, when they saw that Jian Wushuang could suppress Wang Lu perfectly, they immediately felt relieved. Only Supreme Black Source was frowning slightly. He did not know why, but he had a bad feeling. Within the Divine Kingdom battlefield, Jian Wushuang stepped on the void and his black hair flew in the air. He looked down at Wang Lu, who had fallen into the snow and turned into an ice sculpture. He said coldly, "Explode!" In an instant, the 3-headed snake, Wang Lu's body exploded and shattered into countless ice fragments. Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief. He could feel that the sword chi in the snowstorm had completely crushed Wang Lu into dregs. Hiss, hiss, hiss. However, at this moment, whoosh, countless tentacles surged out and twisted together, turning into the appearance of the three-headed snake. His aura did not decrease at all. He raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang with eyes full of ridicule. What? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Even he had to admit that the Void Warrior's recovery ability was so terrifying that even he could not help but be moved. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and sneered. Let's see how many hits you can take. 4 seasons, winter to spring. Boom! In an instant, the wind and snow disappeared, and the spring thunder exploded. A continuous drizzle came down like a heavenly tribulation song. 1,000,000 raindrops were 1,000,000 sword chi. Murderous intent was everywhere. Fall! Jian Wushuang said coldly. In an instant, millions of raindrops of sword chi rolled down at the same time. Each sword chi was a full-force attack from Jian Wushuang. This move had once killed Supreme Yuding and over 10,000 doppelgangers of Supreme Bing Yi. Rumble! In an instant, the three-headed snake, Wang Lu, only had time to shoot a few fake bullets before his body was destroyed by millions of sword chi again, and his bones were crushed. In the main hall, the crowd cheered once again when they saw this. However, this time around, Supreme Black Source was not the only one frowning. Even the eyes of Cosmos God flashed with a sharp glint. Within the Divine Kingdom battlefield, something's wrong. There's a problem. Jian Wushuang stopped and frowned. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. He had fought with the three-headed snake Wang Lu on the off-world battlefield. He understood Wang Lu's strength. He was definitely not this weak. Until now, Wang Lu had not used his trump card, the Void Explosion. This guy must be planning something in his mind. Jian Wushuang was naturally intelligent. He understood everything in an instant. Why did Wang Lu challenge him to a one-on-one fight? Why didn't he use his unique skill? This could only prove one thing. That was that Wang Lu was holding back his big move. Fine. I'd like to see what you're up to. Jian Wushuang snorted coldly and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. 4 seasons, spring to summer. Rumble. Instantly, the raindrops that filled the sky disappeared, and a blazing sun suddenly rose up and hung high in the 9 heavens. The Summer of the 4 Seasons sword technique was the most violent and terrifying move of the 4 seasons. Jian Wushuang did not believe that Wang Lu would dare to deal with it as easily as before. Go! The next moment, Jian Wushuang waved his right hand heavily, and the blazing sun immediately crashed toward Wang Lu. Rumble! The entire Divine Kingdom battlefield shook madly. The earth began to dry up and crack, and dozens of ravines appeared in the sky. The heavens fell and the earth cracked. This time, Wang Lu's expression finally changed. His pupils contracted violently, and a serious look appeared on his face as he said, "Void Explosion!" In an instant, both of Wang Lu's heads exploded. Thousands of energy accumulated in his mouth, and a terrifying light wave was born. Roar! The next moment, the light wave shot out and collided with the huge sun that was crashing down. Whizzes! The void distorted. Soon after, this Divine Kingdom battlefield that was created by the hands of Cosmos God, the extremely stable space, started to be filled with dense cracks that were like cobwebs. Countless destructive energies exploded from the point of impact, crazily surging in all directions, completely raising the mountains and rivers in this Divine Kingdom into chaos. In the main hall, the supreme martial artists who were observing this scene were all shocked. The power of their battle has already reached the level of a half-invincible supreme. No! Even ordinary half-invincible supremes wouldn't be able to unleash such a powerful might. It can be said that the two of them are infinitely close to being the invincible supreme realm. Jian Wushuang is indeed worthy of the title of the number 1 heaven's favorite in the universe. It's been so many years since Jiedong died at the hands of Void Warriors 100,000 chaos cycles ago. I haven't seen such a heaven-defying person. It's a blessing for our universe to have such a genius. Everyone's gazes were fixed on him as they exclaimed in admiration. Even the eyes of Cosmos God seated high up on the main seat flashed with a strange glow. Xianyi, you've got a good disciple. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Ah! Wang Lu roared madly. The terrifying light wave in his mouth continued to become thicker and its power increased. Innate divine power, primordial universe, secret skill of dragon blood. Jian Wushuang's eyes were also filled with anger. He activated all kinds of secret skills and surging divine power and went all out. The next moment, boom! The two energies finally exploded, and a huge mushroom cloud rose. The entire divine kingdom began to shake like crazy, as if it would be destroyed in the next moment. At this moment, the three-headed snake, Wang Lu, suddenly let out an extremely deranged laugh. This is the time. His body exploded and turned into a small snake as thick as an arm. He flicked and turned into a flowing light, appearing beside Jian Wushuang in an instant. Then he opened his mouth wide, revealing two sharp and thick fangs that glowed with a cold light. He bit at Jian Wushuang's neck fiercely. Void technique, snake god curse.